Care for some sweets, dears? Asked Fred from the door, doing a surprisingly good impression of the trolley lady. Not from you, they'll turn me into a nervous newt, Ron said. Nervous newt? That's a good one, Ron. Can we do a nervous newt nugget, Fred? George asked. Nah, too complex. Maybe we could do a nervous newt student nugget, though, Fred replied, and they all laughed. Holly looked at her trunk and remembered the bag of gold inside. She didn't want it, didn't want to spend what should have been half Cedric's on anything. This, though, he probably would have approved of. Hey, you two. Still looking to start that shop? Holly asked. Well, if our mum doesn't keep trying to burn all our product, Fred said. This money should have been half Cedric's, but I reckon he would have approved. So consider your first 2 investors sorted, Holly said, handing over the bag. Wait, Holly, that's 1,000 galleons. Exactly. Take it, and give us all some laughs, yeah. I get the feeling that we'll be needing them next year, Holly said. You got it, boss. Say, wanna appear in some endorsements? Eventually, though, the train ride had to end. Holly stepped out of the train and saw Sirius and Remus waiting for her. She rushed forward and hugged both of them tightly. Sirius seemed a little bemused, but Remus patted her back gently. Good to see you too, kid. Shit year, huh? Sirius asked. It was pretty awful, but there were good things too. The Yule Ball, playing enough Quidditch to have a proper league, even in the graveyard there were good things, Holly said. Speaking of the Yule Ball, how are you and the girlfriend? Sirius asked. We're, good. She puts up with my moping, anyway, Holly said. I do believe she's coming over, in fact, Remus said. Holly turned around, and she saw Ginny running towards her at speed. Then she kissed Holly full on the lips, and Holly felt her heart heal just a little bit. That tiny irrational fear that Ginny was embarrassed to be with someone like her falling away at the look on Mrs. Weasley's face. I remember moping plenty. You better write. Ginny said. I will. There was, something I wanted to ask you to do, Holly said, feeling awkward. Would you come to the support group with me? I'd like everyone there to meet you, Holly continued. If only so I can see if this Penny is all she's cracked up to be, Ginny said, and Holly felt herself laugh a little more. Holly walked out of the station and back towards Privet Drive with a faint smile and a heavy heart. Notes. Thank you all for coming along on this journey so far. How did I write 160k words in 4 months? The reception this fic has had means a lot to me, as do all the wonderful comments people have posted. Time for Year 5. Chapter 74, Year 5, Chapter 1. Chapter text. Penny Harper looked forward to her friend Holly's return every year. The younger, black-haired girl was certainly an odd one, but her fearlessness was an inspiration to more than Penny. She only spent 2 months of the year in Little Whinging, a feat Penny greatly envied her for. She herself was counting down the days she could leave the place behind and never come back. Not that she didn't have friends here, but she had none who were planning to stay in this maze of identical houses full of identical managers and shop owners who all seemed to have come off an assembly line somewhere. Well off, but not well off enough to fit in at the places they really wanted to be. Too well off to blend into the working class backgrounds more than a few had come from, so they congregated together, talking about how immigrants were going to take their jobs and the homosexuals were going to corrupt their children. At least her mother had stopped trying to get her to find a boyfriend. She'd even managed to get away with wearing her leather jackets and ripped-up jeans around the house, rather than the sort of nondescript, modest clothing she'd worn to evade her mother's rants. Not that her dear old mother accepted her, but her father was away too often to do anything about it, and her mother didn't really have the guts to stand up to Penny seriously. She had a job, now. It was just a few hours a week waitressing at the restaurant the support group met at, but the owner liked her and was happy for the help. The money wasn't a lot, but she saved most of it. Penny had, to the surprise of all her friends, managed to keep a girlfriend for more than a few months. She'd been known for her train wreck romances, but what she had with Jane Thomas, it felt special to her, in a way that none of the others had. Hey, Penny. Everything ready? Jane asked. Yeah, got all the chairs and shit moved. You said Holly's back? Penny asked. She should be, but, look, she might not be in the best spirits. My brother said a friend of hers died, she might have mentioned him to you in a letter, Cedric. That's awful. He's the one she asked to the dance, right? She had such a big crush on him, Penn said. Yeah. Mind you, from what my brother tells me she and her girlfriend are surprisingly serious, Jane said, and Penny made a face. Oh you slag, I'm right here. No lusting after taken girls while your girlfriend is talking to you. You know you can't resist me, Penny said, sticking her pierced tongue out at Jane. It was a new thing for her, but she loved it. Her girlfriend had the decency to look rather embarrassed. Before Jane could think of a comeback, the door to the restaurant opened. Holly Potter, looking older and more world-weary, walked through it, leading a nervous red-headed girl in a sundress by the hand. It might have been the cutest thing Penny had ever seen. Holly. And you must be the girlfriend we've heard so much about, Penny said, as she rushed over. Holly smiled at her, and so did the girl. Hi, Penny, right? I'm Ginny Weasley, Ginny said. Yep, that's me. That's Jane Thomas over there, my girlfriend. I've been wanting to meet you ever since Holly started talking about you in her letters, Penny said. Hey, Jane. How's Dean doing? Ginny asked. The two of them peeled off a little, and Penny turned towards Holly. Jane told me about Cedric. I'm so sorry, Holly, Penny said, hugging the younger girl. Thanks, Penny, Holly said, with one of her sad little smiles. Penny knew her friend often censored her stories, and she could tell there were scars on her soul she'd never let anyone see. The way her hands sometimes shook, the haunted look in her eyes, they reminded Penny of her father. Holly was very quiet that meeting and Ginny seemed hesitant to start talking, but when she did, she didn't stop. Eventually, she managed to drag her girlfriend out of the shell she seemed to have retreated into for a little while. Don't hide in your room all summer, Holly, Penny said, and Holly shook her head sadly. I'll try, she said, and that would have to be good enough. Holly looked up at the slowly fading paint of her bedroom ceiling. The Dursleys had stopped caring about how her room looked as soon as they'd given it to her, and that suited Holly fine. Despite spending less time there, her room at Grimmauld Place was far more of a home to her than this one. All her little knickknacks and old books, all the things she'd managed to keep after she'd been able to stop living out of her trunk, were in that room. She had put up a few posters of girls in swimsuits on the walls, both because they were good-looking and she found the Dursleys' reactions to them hilarious. The problem was that she was restless. There was simply very little to do at Privet Drive. She had already read all her books, done all her homework, and answered every letter she'd been sent. She had the Daily Prophet delivered every day, but the news there was anything but good. Several foreign dark wizards had been arrested trying to enter the country, and one of them had actually gone down fighting over the channel. Everyone was on high alert, and neither of the two candidates for minister denied that Voldemort was back. They just disagreed on how to stop him. Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, had advocated for a strong response, arrests of known imperious Death Eaters, emergency war powers to be granted to the Hit Wizards and ERA office, and more. So did her opponent, and head of the ERA office, Rufus Scrimger, for that matter. Where they differed was how they wanted to handle the new international element. Bones wanted to call on the ICW for help to deal with what was clearly an international problem, whereas Scrimger seemed to want to fan xenophobic sentiment to increase his chances in the election. He seemed to have picked a winning strategy, which made Holly want to blow something up magic. As that would get her expelled, she was instead reduced to moodily staring at faded paint on her ceiling. Her friends were all already at the headquarters of Dumbledore's new anti-Voldemort organization, the Order of the Phony E, which was never named in letters, mostly because, being behind a new Fidelius charm, it couldn't be. Holly, of course, was well aware that it was number 12 Grimmauld Place. Dumbledore kept her updated via Dobby, who would pop back to Hogwarts every few days to get a new letter for her. Owlpost was too easy to intercept, apparently. She did have some fun during those long, slow summer days. Hanging out with Penny and her friends was always entertaining. She couldn't go far from Privet Drive, though, and she knew she had invisible minders whenever she left the ward line. Whoever they had on the Thursday morning shift was rather clumsy. Holly's heard something small hit her window. Confused, she stood and temporarily abandoned her teenage ennui to investigate. She peered out into the night, and saw Penny and Jane hiding behind the Dursleys' hedges, with small bits of gravel in their hands. Holly opened her window and grinned. Making sure she had her wand on her, she opened her window and climbed silently down. After all her adventures and sneaking around, Holly was both very good at climbing and at not making noise when she moved. She was especially proud of her almost stealthy landing, and she was sure the Dursleys hadn't noticed her escape as she joined her friends. "Hey, Holly. We're gonna go to the park. Some kids who aren't total assholes about, well you know, are having a party. Want to come along?" Penny asked. "Sure. I was in for a very interesting evening of watching paint dry otherwise," Holly said. That was only a partial truth. She'd have spent the latter portion of the evening tossing and turning, dreaming of the graveyard again. Dreaming of Cedric's ice-cold corpse, and of killing Barty Crouch Jr. The party mostly turned out to be a bunch of misfits hanging out in the park and drinking, with music being played out of tinny speakers, but Holly didn't mind. She was glad just to get out of Privet Drive, and the alcohol dulled the pain that was always hiding behind her boredom. The beer they were mostly drinking was only about twice as alcoholic as butterbeer, anyway. She was treated like a local legend, everyone always wanting to know if she was really trans, if she really could make Dudley Dursley flinch with just a word. Somehow, she'd become almost a folk hero to the misfits and outcasts of Little Whinging, most of whom had been victimized by Dudley Dursley at some point. "Shit, run," someone shouted, and Holly whipped around, her hand unconsciously reaching for her wand. It stilled when she realized the torches and shadowed figures advancing towards them were Muggle police officers looking to crack down on teenage delinquents, not dark wizards. She took off anyway, running with Penny and Jane as the party broke up in record speed. Holly was in much better shape than either of her two friends, and she had to moderate her pace to let them keep up. The dark clouds overhead let loose their long-awaited rain, and Holly laughed as they found themselves taking shelter under a bridge. A creek ran through here, but only through a thin concrete channel. Jane and Penny were panting and out of breath. "How much exercise do you do?" Penny asked. Holly flexed her upper arm muscles, which were not exactly impressively large, though they had become more defined last year. Well, look who we have here, the faggot and the dykes, a classic combo," Piers Porkis said. Dudley and his gang had apparently decided to take shelter under the same bridge, emerging out of the shadows in a cloud of cigarette smoke. "Fuck off, Porkis. I'm not in the mood to mock Didikins today," Holly said, tiredly. She knew Dobby was invisible nearby, as well as her monitor from the Order. She also knew that, by this point, Dudley was afraid enough of what might happen that she could run a pretty good bluff. "Yeah. Don't you have any 10-year-olds to go beat up?" Penny said, tiredly. "Hey." "He was Piers said, but he seemed unable to continue. An unnatural chill had seeped into the air, and Holly felt the tinge of despair touch her. Her blood went cold because she knew that sensation. She knew that she had to act fast, or she'd be incapacitated and her friends would be left defenseless. "Expecto Patronum!" Holly shouted, drawing her wand from her charmed unnoticeable holster. A brilliant silver doe burst forth from her wand not a moment too soon because what was unmistakably a Dementor flew down towards them out of the rain and darkness. Holly's doe patroness trampled it underfoot and sent it running, and everyone under the bridge stared at her, wide-eyed. "What the fuck?" Penny said, a sentiment everyone else seemed to echo. "I promise I'll explain later, but I just need you to trust me that we're in real danger and do what I say," Holly said, trying to see if there were any more Dementors out there in the rain. "Listen to Harry Potter, guys," Dudley said, hands in his pockets. "You knew about this, Big D?" one of his gang asked, but Holly held up her hand for silence and tried to go out a little from the cover of the bridge. It was only some unnatural sense of warning, almost like she could see the spells flashing towards her before they were cast, that saved her. She cast as quick an unverbal shield charm as she could, and several curses splattered against in gouts of fire and flashes of light. She wanted to fight back, but the magic on the anti-darkness glasses from the tournament had long since faded and she couldn't make out where her attackers were. She retreated back into the cover of the bridge and swore. They were waiting for her out there, and she could only maintain her patroness for so long. Chapter 75, Year 5, Chapter 2. Chapter text. What the fuck is going on, Holly? Penny asked as Holly retreated back into the shelter of the bridge. Her patroness, the glowing silver doe, stood guard. Short explanation. I'm a witch, there are evil wizards out there trying to kill me. Stay by the silver doe and you'll be safe from their soul-sucking monster pets, Holly said, looking around to see if everyone who had been here at the start was okay. Two figures seemed to appear from nowhere close by, then, their disillusionment charms fading. One was the tiny house elf Dobby, who Holly had saved from abuse and enslavement. He worked for Hogwarts now and was often assigned to watch over Holly at the Dursleys. The other was a young woman in a long brown coat with spiky violet hair. Something about her seemed familiar to Holly, though she could place her. Still, Holly had her wand pointed at the woman before she could even finish dismissing her disillusionment charm. She knew Dobby could be trusted, but she hadn't been able to keep complete track of her order minder. Watch her, Holly, I'm with Dumbledore. Nymphadora Tonks, but if you ever call me anything but Tonks, Tonks said, and Holly lowered her wand. Now she could place the face, if not the hair. She'd been Mad Eye's trainee during Holly's 3rd year at Hogwarts. Right. You wouldn't happen to have some way to get into contact with him, would you? Holly asked. Sent a patroness to headquarters, but that'll take half an hour at least. I'd say apparate out, but they have an anti-apparition jinx up, Tonks said, shaking her head. Penny, Jane, Dudley and Dudley's friends were watching the conversation with wide eyes. Excuse me, Miss Tonks and Miss Holly, but Dobby could be apparating away. Wizard jinxes cannot be stopping elf magic, Dobby said proudly, and Holly smiled as she remembered, house elves were one of the few types of beings able to operate at Hogwarts. Can you go warn Dumbledore and then apparate everyone else out, or? Holly asked. Dobby is being sorry, miss, but elf magic is sized for elves. We can bring people along, but it is very tiring to do so. Dobby is only capable of taking 7 of you away, Dobby said, tears in his eyes. Fuck. Dobby, listen to me, I want you to take everyone but me and Tonks to the Dursleys' house, and then go warn Dumbledore, Holly said, kneeling down in front of him so their eyes were level. Holly, Tonks began, but Holly interrupted her. Nobody else dies for me. Not after Cedric, Holly said, and she felt a wave of anger rising within her. She'd been so stupid to leave the ward line at night, all because she'd been bored. If someone was going to suffer for it, at least it shouldn't be her friends, or even her cousin, who was a complete ass but didn't deserve to die. She and Tonks could at least attempt to fight their way out or hold on for reinforcements. All right. I hope you have more of a plan than waiting for them to get bored, though, Tonks said. All right, everyone, just hold on to Dobby and he'll take you to number 4 Privet Drive. Stay there until Tonks or I come and get you, all right? And, Dudley, you better make your parents behave, Holly said. It took some time to get everyone touching Dobby, and most of Dudley's friends seemed to be in some kind of shock, not really processing what had happened yet. They disappeared with a crack, leaving Holly and Tonks alone under the bridge. The rain was still pelting down outside, and the only light came from Holly's doe patroness. Tonks' hair had changed from spiky violet to a tied-up dark green, and Holly raised an eyebrow. She hadn't known Tonks was a metamorphmagus. Hey, Tonks, do the underage magic office know which spells I cast? I'm sure they already have a bunch of angry letters on the way, but, Holly asked. Yeah, the trace will report what spell was sued. Why? Tonks responded. Because I think I have an idea how we can call on some more help, Holly said and pointed her wand at a bare section of the wall. She cast a stunning spell, then an obliviation spell, then a stunning spell. The flashes of red and grey light splashed harmlessly against the wall, and Holly repeated the sequence 3 more times. That's a pretty good idea, actually. Got any other cunning plans in that cute little head of yours? Tonks asked. And Holly blushed a little. Tonks was a very good-looking and very cool lady. I'm all out. I guess we just wait until they get bored of waiting, or Holly began, but the sound of spellfire cut her off. Tonks looked at her, and Holly grinned. Seems like help has arrived. Let's say we go join in, yeah. Holly said, and she got ready to rush out into the fight. Merlin, but you are a menace, Kid Tonks said, shaking her head but following Holly anyway. With the rain still pouring down, all Holly could see was the flashes of spellfire, and with whoever had ambushed her distracted, she cast a disillusionment charm on herself and entered the fray. Illuminated by the spell smashing against his shield charm, Holly whipped lightning at a man in ragged leathers. With his shield charm already weakened, he was blasted backwards by the sheer force of the curse and collapsed limply on the ground from the pain. She stunned him and then dove for cover as spells flew towards her. The long, concrete creek turned not far past the bridge, and so the attackers had been holding that bend against whoever had come to Holly's rescue, but now she and Tonks were in amongst them. What had been a battle defined by long distances and darkness was now fought at nearly point-blank range, something Holly had gotten very, very good at in her past year of schooling. Holly casually slipped into the minds of her opponents, rarely having to shield herself as she blasted apart shield charms and stunned anyone she could. A few were revived, but Holly knew that all she had to do was cause enough of a distraction to allow her rescuers to win their fight. There were constant cracks of apparition in the distance, and one group of attackers, who all seemed to dress much the same in ragged dark leathers and small bits of enchanted metal armor, were subject to dozens of stunning spells and blasting hexes fired by wizards zooming overhead on brooms. Tonks was only a little behind Holly, making sure to restrain anyone she stunned with conjured ropes and watching her back. Thera was an incredible duelist, her casting quick and precise, just like her mentor, Mad-Eye Moody. Holly use of the little water that flowed through the small concrete channel to defend herself from dark curses, remembering Dumbledore's lessons. Then there was a flash of bright orange-white fire in the distance, and Holly cheered. She knew what that phoenix fire meant, and so did her attackers. She could only see Dumbledore vaguely through the darkness and the rain, but the attackers fell before him like wheat before a scythe. He called on the concrete of the creek's banks to restrain them, the rain to defend himself, and cast a dozen spells Holly had barely even heard of. Finally, the anti-apparition jinx failed and the few conscious attackers retreated, leaving behind a thoroughly destroyed bit of Muggle infrastructure. It looked like news reports from a war, Holly thought. The concrete was littered with craters and small fires burnt wherever they were protected from the rain. More than a dozen men lay wounded or unconscious, and Holly was sure a few had been killed. The Dementor that had started the whole thing was nowhere to be seen, though it had probably fled the Phoenix Fire, or perhaps the several corporeal patronesses Holly could see with whoever had arrived to rescue her. "It seems you've had an exciting night," Holly Dumbledore said, as he strode out of the rain and darkness towards her. His wand, so oddly constructed and lined with unfamiliar runes, glowed slightly still. "I know leaving the ward line at night was stupid, Professor, so we can just skip to the part where you tell me how much trouble I'm in," Holly said. "Ah, teenage angst. Leaving your aunt's house at night to go to a party was a rather unwise choice, but you are at that sort of age. In any event, you and your friends are safe, as are those who came to your rescue. Let us continue this conversation out of the rain," perhaps Dumbledore said as he held out a hand to Holly and to Tonks. They both grabbed a hand, and then with the distinctive crack and crushing sensation of apparition, they were in the living room of number 4, Privet Drive. Penny and Jane were sitting next to one another on the couch, while Aunt Petunia gave them a nasty look. Dudley's friends were slumped around the kitchen table, and Dudley and Uncle Vernon seemed to be having some kind of quiet discussion. Everyone turned to look as they arrived. Dumbledore merely looked towards Penny and Jane. Holly shook her head. Then, Dumbledore cast some kind of nonverbal spell, and Dudley's friends gained a glazed look in their eyes. "My apologies for the intrusion, Petunia. Mr. Dursley, your friends should have no memory of these events come morning, instead recalling an enjoyable evening partaking in recreational activities," Dumbledore said with a twinkle in his eyes. Holly had to try very hard not to laugh. What? Dudley said. "That is, your original plans for the evening. Perhaps it would be best if you helped them home as the danger has now passed," Dumbledore said. "Yes, Dudus, why doesn't Daddy drive them home with you?" Petunia said, her voice high and tense. Vernon looked at his wife and seemed to be about to argue, then he looked at Dumbledore and Tonks again. He picked up his keys and helped Dudley's friends to his car. "Most helpful, Petunia. As to Miss Thomas and her companion, you two should also be able to return home without peril. I am sure if you return tomorrow during daylight hours, Miss Potter will be able to better explain tonight's events." I am certain you can inform Miss Harper of the necessity for secrecy, Miss Thomas Dumbledore said, and Jane nodded. She led a very shocked-looking Penny out of the house. You said we would be safe when you saddled us with that degenerate. I want him gone if he's going to bring this sort of danger to my family. Petunia shouted. And you are safe. No dark wizard has menaced your home, nor has your son been harmed. In fact, it was the girl you so disparaged that ensured his safety, above her own, I might add. In any event, Holly will be leaving on her birthday, a spare week from now. Surely you can endure the niece who saved your son's life for another week, Dumbledore said, and Holly's aunt flushed and looked away. Thank you, Holly, Petunia said, through gritted teeth. Dumbledore smiled as if he was unaware of how forced Petunia's apology was. Well, now that has been taken care of. Tonks, if you would inform Mrs. Dursley of the security arrangements to ease her mind. Dumbledore said, and Tonks led Petunia away from the living room. I was such an idiot. Putting everyone in danger because I was bored, Holly said, and now that the adrenaline had begun to fade, all she could feel was a sort of numb regret. Indeed. Tonight was a serious lapse in judgment, Holly. If things had gone only a little differently, your friends could have been seriously hurt or even killed. If the men who had attacked you had been Death Eaters instead of simply hired thugs, you may even have been delivered to Lord Voldemort. I must ask you to promise me that you will not leave the ward line again without a pre-arranged escort, Dumbledore said, and Holly nodded. I promise, she said, and stared down at her feet. How had she been so stupid, she wondered. She just hadn't given the danger any thought at all. Good. Now, I think it is best if you went to bed. The Ministry will be around in the morning to take a statement from you, Dumbledore said, and he disappeared with a crack. Holly walked up the stairs and collapsed into her bed, not even bothering to get changed. She had nearly gotten Penny and Jane killed to go to a party she hadn't even enjoyed that much. She had been a total idiot, she knew, and she cried herself to sleep thinking about what could have happened. Chapter 76, Year 5, Chapter 3. Chapter text. And that's when you returned here, Theodore asked Holly, as his partner took notes. They'd been talking to Holly for nearly an hour at this point. Dumbledore took me with sidelong apparition, but yes, Holly explained. Well, I don't think we'll have any more questions at this time, Miss Potter. Our financial division has linked payments in the Muggle world to the men who attacked you from an account formerly belonging to the Malfoy family. The wizards themselves were Greeks, wands for hire from the continent, Theodore said. That SOS trick with the trace was some quick thinking, kid. Bones had us sort you an exemption from the statute, though, for the duration of the emergency. Maybe we'll see you in the office after Hogwarts, huh? The other asked. Maybe, Holly said, as the two walked out of number 4 Privet Drive and disappeared with a sharp crack. Waiting a few moments to make sure they were gone, Holly waved Penny and Jane over from across the road. Jesus, I thought they were never going to leave, Penny said. Were those errors? Jane asked. Yeah, they wanted to get a statement or something. I left you two out of it, Holly said, as she saw her aunt purse her lips as Holly's friends entered the house. They walked up the stairs, and all three of them crowded into Holly's small bedroom. What's an error, wizard cops? Penny asked. Think Scotland Yard crossed with commandos, basically. There are normal wizard police officers, the hit wizards, and, well, it's kind of complicated, but the errors are serious business, Holly said. And they want to wipe my memory of last night? Penny asked. Well, that's probably a little beneath them, to be honest. So long as you don't go to the evening news or anything, you should be fine. Actually, how did you manage not to get memory charmed, Jane? Holly asked. I live with Dean's family. Apparently, that counts, Jane explained. Huh. I imagine you've got questions, Penny, Holly said, sitting down on her bed. You know, a few. So all the stuff you said at the meetings. Lightly edited, but the truth, Holly said. Did you really save Jane's life once? Penny asked. I did, Holly said, and Penny seemed to pick up on her discomfort immediately. They spent the rest of the morning talking about less consequential topics, playing card games and simply hanging out. Holly had never done anything like it at Privet Drive, but it helped her mood immensely. Penny, things are looking bad out there. If you can. I'd get out of the country before too long, Holly said, as her friend got up to go. Penny's eyes went wide, but she nodded slowly. We'll see what we can do, Jane said. The Daily Prophet arrived not long after, and Holly read the front page article all about the attack on her with a feeling of dread. Potter attacked by foreign thugs. Dear readers, this reporter must relay to you a most alarming piece of news. Our own Holly Potter was attacked by more than a dozen dark wizards last night. Luckily, she was able to fight back and signal for help, and all of the assailants were apprehended thanks to the bravery of our Auras and Hit wizards. Interrogation under Veritaserum revealed the men to be wands for hire from the tumultuous state of Greece, still in chaos after the brutal uprising of dark wizards that occurred there 7 years ago. One must wonder at the competence of the ICW's so-called peacekeepers if bands of marauders can slip past several borders to menace the good wizarding citizens of this isle. Both candidates for the position of Minister for Magic gave statements to the media on the attack, and this reporter cannot help but note that Madame Bones gives no reference whatsoever as to the foreign nature of these dark subversives. Rufus Scrimger, on the other hand, condemned the French officials who provided portkeys to the assailants in exchange for bribes and the ICW's failed peacekeeping efforts in the region. For more on the heated election, see pages 3, 4, and 22. Rita Skeeter. Holly flipped to the sports section and found no solace there. Her beloved Holyhead Harpies had lost 120 to 270 to Puddlemere United. She ended up just balling the paper up and chucking it into the bin. She wanted to help Bones out with the election, but she really did not want to go up against Skeeter without being prepared. Holly had barely managed to hold on when Skeeter had been actively looking to make Holly look good. She spent much of the next week feeling sorry for herself, barely emerging from her room, and answering her friends' letters only tersely. Life at Privet Drive had seemed to be approaching bearable for a few years, but now that Holly was unable to leave the ward line, she was once again practically a prisoner in her aunt and uncle's house. Unlike the summer before her second year at Hogwarts, this imprisonment was self-imposed. She knew how lucky she had been that none of her friends had been hurt during the attack, and that dark wizards had no real need to wait for night time to launch another attempt. She had no idea why the Locket Voldemort would pay some group of wands for hire to attack her. Surely he had to have known that it was very unlikely to have succeeded, but she knew he had the vast majority of the Malfoy family fortune. A second attack would be literal pocket change to him, and Holly didn't plan to risk it. She did send Penny a letter for the meeting and was touched when her friend came to number 4 Privet Drive again to say goodbye on the day before Holly's birthday. Holly had marked the days until her birthday in red ink on her calendar, and she had trouble falling asleep the night before. It was an alien experience to her. For so long her birthday had merely been a day like any other, and now she had not only all the expectations of any happy child towards it, presents, her friends, and such, but it also marked her return to her godfather and the wizarding world. She woke at the sound of someone walking up the stairs and drew her wand from its hiding palace. She didn't bother getting changed out of her very comfortable oversized Harpies shirt and muggle shorts, instead of advancing slowly towards the door to her room. Her heart was beating fast, but her hand was still as she felt herself sink back into the place she went whenever there was danger. All her old, gnawing worries melted away, all her guilt washed away like sandcastles at high tide. There was only the moment, and Holly relished in it as she opened her bedroom door with a wave of her hand. She lunged forward, a stunning spell flying from her wand. The beam of magic briefly illuminated the hallway in crimson light, and Holly felt like an idiot when she saw Sirius deflect her spell. Merlin, Sirius. It's 4 in the bloody morning, Holly said, lowering her wand slightly. HMPH. I told you she was more on the ball than that, Black. Get ready to move, Potter Mad Eye Moody said from behind Sirius, but Holly paid him no mind for a moment as she gave Sirius a hug. Good to see you too, kid. Given what happened last week, we're being a bit more secure about moving you around this year. Go get changed and meet us outside with your broom, yeah? Sirius asked, and Holly nodded. She could see a half-dozen members of the Order of the Phoenix crowding around the staircase and hallway. In addition to Sirius and Mad Eye, Holly recognized Tonks, with a neon blue mohawk today. There were 3 more Holly didn't know: a tall, dark-skinned man wearing an Auror's coat, a short woman in flying leathers, and a muscular man wearing traditional robes. I'll just go get changed, then Holly said awkwardly, and she threw on the only clothes she'd left out of her trunk. She'd already packed all of her things last night. She shrugged on her basilisk skin coat too. If she needed an escort, it was probably best for her to be protected at least a little from spellfire. She let Hedwig out, shrunk and lightened her trunk, and grabbed her firebolt before she headed downstairs and out on the Dursleys' carefully maintained front lawn. "All right, Potter, just stay in formation with us, and the advance and rear guards should keep us clear of any trouble. Things get hairy, stay with Black and fly at rooftop level," Moody said, and Holly felt like she might be dreaming as she heard him say advance and rear guards. "Disillusionment charms, everybody," the dark-skinned man called out, and Holly went for her wand only for Sirius to gently stop her and cast the charm on her instead. "You might be exempt from punishment, but the trace is still on your wand," Holly Sirius explained. The flight over London was uneventful, but flying at night at near rooftop level was just the thing Holly had needed to break her out of her week-long haze. She relished pushing her broom to its limits, using the instinctual magic of her animagus form to give her and the Order members favorable winds. Holly smiled as she saw the sunrise just before they came into land outside of Grimmauld Place, and she hovered for a moment to watch as the first rays of orange light slipped above the London skyline. Then she landed gracefully right outside the faded townhouse she called home, these days. The disillusionment charms faded, and Holly saw most of the Order members follow her inside. She'd heard that the Weasleys were already here, and if she'd had to get out of bed at 3 in the morning to fly her around, she'd want some of Mrs. Weasley's breakfast food too. "Happy birthday, Holly," by the way, Sirius said as they walked into number 12 Grimmauld Place. She smiled as she saw the familiar hallways, now in a much better state of repair than when she'd first seen it. The wallpaper was no longer peeling and faded, and the last vestiges of dust and grime had been thoroughly done away with. "Mum, Holly's here," Ginny shouted out from the kitchen table, still in her pajamas, and then she ran towards Holly and hugged her. Holly kissed her in return, and as they parted she blushed as she realized Mrs. Weasley had been standing right there. "Happy birthday," Ginny said, and Holly smiled. Ron and Hermione were down first, and then the twins. Everyone piled into the huge dining room rather than the kitchen because there were just so many people for breakfast. Mrs. Weasley whipped up an excellent meal anyway, full of crispy bacon, perfectly scrambled eggs, and more. "How was the flight? Might I try to take you via the Channel Islands?" Remus asked her, and Holly made sure to finish the bit of bacon she had in her mouth before answering. "It was fun, honestly. Never flown quite that low over London before," Holly said. Quidditch players, the dark-skinned man from her escort, who Holly had learned was called Kingsley Shacklebolt, muttered to a general round of raucous laughter. "Oh, dear, Ginny and Hermione are in your room, I hope you don't mind?" Mrs. Weasley asked as breakfast started to break up. "Oh, no, that's fine, Mrs. Weasley," Holly said. "We're having your party at dinner time, so everyone can be here, but happy birthday anyway, dear," Mrs. Weasley said, and then she gave Holly a hug. Ascending the stairs to her room with Ron, Ginny, and Hermione, Holly grinned as she saw the extra mattresses on the floor and her untouched bed. "Seriously, one of you could have taken the bed," Holly said. Ron laughed, but Ginny and Hermione shared an odd look. "You really need to clean your room better, Holly. And hide your fire Oohisky someplace less obvious," Ginny said, and they all burst out laughing. Chapter 77, Year 5, Chapter 4. Chapter Text. Holly's 15th birthday party was much smaller than her last one had been. Grimmauld Place was under a Fidelis charm and acting as the Order's headquarters, so most of her friends couldn't attend. Still, Mrs. Weasley had made a huge spread of all of her favorite foods, and Ron, Hermione, and Ginny were all there, so Holly was happy. Penny and Jane had apparently mailed Sirius a present for Holly, and she was gladder than ever that they'd escaped from the ambush unscathed. She was given an ample supply of minor magical trinkets, books, clothes, and Honeydukes chocolates. She was touched by the makeup Penny and Jane had sent her, though she knew they'd gone to other members of the support group for specifics as neither of them was very interested in it. Most of all, she was glad to spend time out of the stifling boredom of her bedroom in Privet Drive. Holly even laughed when the twins inevitably gave her a prank gift first, the innocuous-looking package turning her hair a bright Weasley red. She knew, of course, that all her grief and worries would be waiting for her after the lighter had died down and the lights were out, but for a few hours, she could ignore them. She lost at cards to Hermione, chess to Ron, and managed to only cry a little. The party broke up by 2, and Holly joined her friends in her room. She loved her room here, the fact that it was hers, more than anything, but also the huge window, the posters of bands and girls in swimsuits, space for all her little volumes and long novels. "This is 3 times the size of my room at the Burrow," Ron said as he stepped inside. "Thanks, I took it from a dead dark wizard," Holly said, the both of them laughing. "It's good to have you back, Holly." "Sirius was being all mopey while you were gone," Ginny said, sitting next to Holly on her bed. "He's been introducing us to Muggle, what was it, takeaway?" "Some of it's pretty good," Ron said, and Hermione smiled slightly. They spent the afternoon just talking, in the easy way Holly treasured. She had quite a few friends, now, but none as close as these 3, none who she could simply spend time with, without her walls and false fronts. People she didn't try to hide her shaking hands from, who knew she woke from nightmares often. Having her girlfriend sleeping a few feet away would be weird, Holly thought, but she supposed that if she'd dated one of her doormates, and it did happen from time to time, she'd have the same experience. Holly didn't think any of hers were interested, though. Apparently, much of Grimmauld Place was housing Order members or supplies at the moment, in addition to most of the Weasleys and Hermione. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation, and Sirius stepped inside. He looked uncharacteristically serious, and Holly wondered what he wanted. "Mind if I borrow Holly for a bit?" he said, and she got up. "I'll be back in a bit, I guess," Holly said, and walked out the door to join Sirius in the hallway. "Dumbledore wants you to come to the Order meetings now you're where," Sirius said quietly, walking away from her bedroom. "Cool," Holly said, not really understanding why Sirius was being so somber about it. "The Order's supposed to be for of-age witches and wizards only. I know Dumbledore has told you about the prophecy, but you're 15, Holly. You shouldn't be involved in something like this," Sirius said. "But I am involved, and I have been for a long time. He tried to keep me out of it, you know. Just didn't work out that way, I suppose," Holly said. "I feel like I've failed your parents, letting you walk in there," Sirius said. "They'd understand, Sirius. You, Dumbledore, you all tried to protect me from this, but it happened anyway. Sometimes there's only so much we can do," Holly said. They had reached the large dining room by that point, and Holly could see that people were already milling about inside. The noise of a half-dozen soft conversations filtered out just a little through the open door. "You sure you want to come in here?" Sirius asked, one last time. "I'm sure, Sirius," Holly said, and she smiled at him. She would hate not being able to tell her friends everything, but she'd hate not knowing more. Holly walked into the dining room, and all the half-whispered conversations inside stopped. Mrs. Weasley looked vaguely disapproving as Holly walked inside, but Holly knew that expression. She had already lost that argument and was trying not to start it again. She recognized quite a few of the people inside, and it seemed the Order recruited widely. Everyone from Aurors like Kingsley Shacklebolt, Nymphadora Tonks, and the retired Mad-Eye Moody to a housewife like Molly Weasley was there. Actually, Holly thought every adult Weasley save Percy and Charlie was here. Bill, still just as rakishly handsome and cool, was leaning against the wall. Standing next to him was someone Holly didn't recognize, though the two of them seemed quite close. There were also disreputable-looking types and a few Hogwarts teachers, including her least favorite, Professor Severus Snape. Snape had always hated Holly because he and her dad had hated each other. After she came out he had been briefly nasty, before seemingly trying very hard to ignore that she existed. She still had no idea why, but as she entered the room he turned to see who had just walked in. "Lil, Miss Potter. I was unaware underage witches were allowed into these meetings," Snape said, and Holly felt confused. Snape mistaking her for her mother was bizarre. They might have similar eyes and facial structure, but her hair was jet black, and currently magically dyed red. Admittedly, a brother red than her mother's had been, but even so. "Miss Potter is a special exemption, Severus, for reasons that I am sure you are aware of," Dumbledore said, and Holly turned around to see him just behind her. "Now that we are all here, shall we begin?" he continued, and everyone seemed to find a seat. Holly felt very awkward for a moment before she sat down in an open chair just beside Remus and Sirius. No more incursions on the Hall of Prophecy after that attempt with the elf, Dumbledore, a wizard Holly didn't know said. Good, good. Severus, have you any further information? Dumbledore asked as he took his seat at the head of the long varnished wooden table. The Dark Lord is still biding his time, as you suspected. He has the majority of the Death Eaters with him, and more foreign fighters and garden variety dark wizards are flocking to his banner by the day. Crouch may be dead, but his rhetoric of Britain as a dark fortress to retake the continent lives on, though we have the distinct advantage of Voldemort considering his other self at least as large a threat as us, Snape said, very carefully not looking at Holly. We've been trying to track, what are we calling him, anyway? Tonks asked. I believe Locket Riddle was what we settled on, Bill Weasley said. Right, Locket Riddle is being a right bit sneakier than ordinary Voldemort. We think that ambush in Surrey was his work, but his inner circle is almost certainly very small, he's probably traveling with at most 5 people. We know 2 of them, the host's mother, Narcissa Malfoy, and the elf creature, Tonks explained. If only Black had not dismissed it, we would have only the one Dark Lord to worry about, Snape said. If only you'd have noticed what your dear friends the Malfoys were being so shifty about, Sirius spat back. What is done, gentlemen. Any news on the election, Dumbledore? Kingsley said. Unfortunately, the incident in Surrey seems to have emboldened Rufus. He sees enemies everywhere, these days. Still, he seems to be trailing Madam Bones, if only barely, Dumbledore said. Would it help if I endorsed Bones or something? Holly asked. Perhaps, but that would also make you an enemy in Scrimger, and that is something we can ill afford. We are fortunate at least that Bones and Scrimger both agree that Voldemort is back and must be fought. A vote in the Wizengamot for a reintroduction of the War Powers Act is scheduled for next week, Dumbledore said. They've already cancelled all leave for errors and hit wizards, and all ordinary crime work has been shifted to the patrol, Tonks said, shaking her head. We have avoided the worst case scenario, then, a ministry that would refuse to fight. Still, Scrimger worries me, he's been talking a lot about border wards and refining the trace, Albus Kingsley said. We can only hope the people choose wisely and prepare contingencies if they do not. The ICW is still dominated by the West, and as awful a legacy as that has, it may aid us when the time comes. Much of the decision-making power there rests in those personally endangered by a Britain ruled by Voldemort, and the rest are American, Dumbledore said. Have you found a defense professor yet, Albus? I know Fudge was making noise about appointing some undersecretary if you couldn't manage it, Remus said. I have a few potential candidates in mind, Remus. Luckily Undersecretary Umbridge has been reassigned to the bewildering and onerous records and editing department after her patron's medical mishap, Dumbledore said, and from the smiles that went around the table, she gathered that Fudge having a heart attack had probably saved her from a truly awful defense professor. Couldn't have happened to a nicer person, Remus said with a smile. This Umbridge lady had to have been truly awful, Holly thought, for Remus to take pleasure in something bad happening to her. He'd even tried to be cordial to Snape. Are we going to see any other Voldemorts pop up, Dumbledore? Bill Weasley asked. I think that unlikely. Miss Potter has already prevented one, and as you are aware he is only capable of making so many items. The fact that he has not moved to secure any others suggests they have been more securely stored away from suitable vessels, Dumbledore said. Holly remembered how Bill had censored himself when Holly had told him the real story of the chamber, and now Dumbledore. What could be so bad that it had to be censored at an order meeting? Are all the guard members ready to transport Miss Potter to King's Cross next month? Mad-Eye asked, to a chorus of nods. Holly felt embarrassed to have taken her to school brought up in the same tones as all these weighty, serious concerns. Very well, then. I believe our business is at an end, though I would like to speak to Miss Potter privately, Dumbledore said. Everyone got up, and about half of the order members started to put on coats and get ready to leave. Molly's already cooked twice today, so if you're staying for dinner, it's Muggle pizza, Sirius said with a grin, and Holly laughed. The idea seemed ridiculous, but she knew from living at Grimmauld Place for some time now that her godfather was entirely serious. People left the grand dining room, which was still full of dark wood and sedate wallpaper, animated and talking to each other in friendly tones. Everyone other than Severus Snape, who seemed to be in a hurry to leave as soon as possible, and who tried very, very hard not to look at Holly. Dumbledore sat down across the vast table from her, and Holly felt for a moment like she'd wandered into one of her aunt's favorite costume dramas. "Happy birthday, Holly. I am sorry for bringing such serious matters to your home on such a day," Dumbledore said. "I'm used to that by now, Professor." "Today was still pretty good," Holly said. "That gladdens me immensely, as I rather need your help with a certain matter," Dumbledore said. Holly raised an eyebrow. "What do you need help with, Professor?" "For a number of reasons, I require a former Hogwarts professor to resume his post this year. Alas, he is rather unlikely to accept my offer, but you may be able to sway dear Horace." "We should be back in time for dinner if all goes well," Dumbledore said, and he extended a hand to Holly. She took it and felt the squeeze of sidelong apparition once again. When it faded, she was standing on a roundabout in what looked like a perfectly ordinary, if upscale Muggle suburb in her best dress. Who, she wondered, could Dumbledore want in the defense professor job so badly? Chapter 78, Year 5, Chapter 5. Chapter Text. Holly followed Dumbledore across the street, eager to see where this mysterious former professor lived. She was surprised to find out that it was a perfectly ordinary-looking house, a nice one, to be sure, but there was not one trace of the usual wizarding whimsy around it. It was the sort of house she thought her uncle's boss might live in, stately, well-kept, and utterly devoid of any shred of personality. Do wait a moment, Holly. Horace has grown rather paranoid of late, so we should probably check for any defenses he may have erected, Dumbledore said, and he waved his wand through the air. There was a slight breeze conjured out of the still night air, and little shimmering streams of light began to blow through the gate and across the lawn. "That looks like a basic intruder alarm, an anti-apparition jinx, and some sort of guardian runes," Holly said. She didn't take ancient runes, though she had picked up a little here and there. Her talents lay more towards the mathematic precision of arithmancy when it came to enchantments. Amongst one or two charms to detect interference, but you have the substance down. "Can you spot the guardians?" Dumbledore asked. Holly looked through the wrought iron gate and saw a well-manicured lawn, a stone path to the front door, and numerous trees. With guardian runes, permanent enchantments to animate an object or objects to fight off intruders, that powerful, she'd have expected grand stone statues or the like. Instead, all she could see was a large number of garden gnomes peeking out of the hedgerows. "The garden gnomes, sir?" "Seriously?" Holly asked. "We work with what we have, my dear girl. Horace has not maintained a permanent residence since Voldemort's return, for reasons that we will discuss later. In any event, this house has a very handy Muggle intercom. Horace, I've come with Miss Holly Potter. Perhaps you could let us in," Dumbledore said to the small box mounted next to the gate. The front door opened, and a portly man in a rich purple robe emerged from it. His hair was white and carefully styled, and he stared at Holly and Dumbledore intently. He waved his wand, and Holly could feel the wards relax around her as the wrought iron gate opened. "Dumbledore. Whatever are you doing here?" the man said, his voice sounding like the sort of jolly posh uncle a sitcom writer might pluck out of a book of clichés. "Surely you got my letters, Horace?" Dumbledore asked. "Well, yes, damn you. I shan't go back." "You hear me, I shan't." "Well, who's that?" Horace said. "Holly Potter, sir. Dumbledore asked me to come along," Holly said, sliding into the sort of politeness that she found usually made dealing with adults she didn't know easier. "The Holly Potter? Yes, well, come on in then. I'm afraid I haven't much to offer you in terms of food. This place is a temporary arrangement, you see," he said, and Holly followed Dumbledore down the stone path and into the house. Holly noticed the photos right away. There were plenty of them, and none of them of Horace. There was also a large pile of letters next to the door, all unopened. "Where are my manners, Horace Slughorn, former professor of potions at Hogwarts School?" "At your service," Slughorn said, offering Holly his hand. She took it gingerly and was relieved at his firm but not too firm grip. "It's good to meet you, Professor," Holly said, smiling her best winning smile. Or at least what she imagined a winning smile to be. "You've made quite the impression these past few years, of course. Slaying that basilisk, catching Peter Pettigrew, the whole mess with the Triwizard, and your, transition, was it? You know, with your hair dyed like that, you look remarkably like your mother. She was a student of mine, one of my favorites, Sloane said, as she showed Holly and Dumbledore through to a sitting room full of elegant furniture. Really? Holly asked. Oh yes, she was an excellent student in all areas of magic, but I dare say she would have put young Severus out of a job had she not died so awfully young. Muggle-born, of course, but she brought that scientific sensibility with her to the potions laboratory and did excellent things with it. Sloane said. I hadn't heard that before, sir. Thank you for telling me, Holly said. It's hardly a burden to discuss an old favorite student with her daughter, my dear. Of course, I knew your father as well, not as talented in potions, but a true master of transfiguration and the like. Quite the troublemaker, but good-hearted, I think is the word. Now, Dumbledore, whatever are you here for? Sloane said. Why, to offer you your job back. Though, if you have the desire to chat about alchemical reductions, I would not be against it, Dumbledore said. I've no intention of getting involved in your war, Dumbledore. One of him was bad enough, but two. I've been thinking of leaving the country, you know, Sloane said. And I am not here to recruit you to fight, Horace. Merely to teach at Hogwarts, a place even Voldemort fears to tread. I see that you are adamant, however, so I shall instead ask to use your bathroom, Dumbledore replied. Down the hall and to the left, Sloane said, sounding confused. I was very impressed by the defenses you managed to set up, Professor. The garden gnomes were particularly inspired, I thought, Holly said. Well, one works with what one has. I admit, I'd rather stronger defenses, but when one's on the move, Sloane said. Stronger defenses like the ones at Hogwarts, and, you know, Voldemort really is afraid of Dumbledore. Deathly afraid, Holly said. I suppose you would be the one to know, Sloane said, his voice sounding faint and unsteady. He has followers all over Europe, now. Even the ICW couldn't keep them all from following you, even if you run as far from this country as you can go, Holly said. I don't think he would expend that much effort on me. I have been offered a place for my skills in potions, but really, one overaged potions master is not worth chasing to the end of the earth, Sloane said, and Holly didn't need legilimency to know he was lying. No, he isn't. But, Professor, I think you and I both know they would chase you there. I'm not going to ask you the reason, I'm sure Dumbledore already knows. He's like that. I'm just going to tell you that Voldemort wants me dead more than anyone else, and he's tried to get me quite a few times at Hogwarts. It's never worked, Holly said. I knew there was a little fire behind that polite mask. Dumbledore, and I know you're listening, I'll do it. I'll come back, you hear me? Sloane shouted. Why, what convenient timing, Horace, Dumbledore said, walking back from the bathroom. Holly grinned a little. Yes, you're very clever, and you have a damned good understudy. We're all suitably impressed, Dumbledore, but I have conditions. Conditions, you hear me? Sloane said. Well, we will certainly try to accommodate them, Dumbledore said. I want a new office, something larger than a broom cupboard, and a raise, Dumbledore, Sloane said. Why, of course, Horace. I'm sure you'll be glad to hear that we have a little slack in the salary budget after Lockhart lobbied the governors to increase his pay, Dumbledore replied, smiling. We'll discuss the specifics later, but you've got me. I'll do it, damn you, Sloane said, shaking his head. Wonderful news, Horace. I shall look forward to your arrival at Hogwarts, Holly, if you would. Dumbledore said, holding out an arm to her. She took it, and the two of them disappeared with a crack. They reappeared in the dining room of number 12, Grimmauld Place. Everyone was clustered around the long, fine wooden table which was piled high with boxes of Muggle pizza. Sirius was in the middle of explaining what it was to Moody, whilst Tonks was already biting into a slice. So, the Slug Club back on? Sirius asked Dumbledore. Holly was most persuasive, and Horace has indeed agreed to return to Hogwarts, Dumbledore said, and Holly saw most of the older members of the Order smile in approval. Sloane must have been a popular teacher in his day, Holly thought. Oh, who's this Horace bloke? Fred asked. Horace Sloane was the potions master when I was at Hogwarts. Bit stuffy, but he really did know his stuff, and he's not Snivellus, Sirius said. Wait, Snape's been fired. Ron said in excitement, Not to crush any youthful exuberance, but Severus will be returning to Hogwarts in a different position this year, Dumbledore said. Wait, don't tell me, Ginny began. Not in our year. Hermione almost shouted. Dumbledore just took a box of pizza and disapparated after that, leaving a number of shocked students behind. Holly wasn't worried for herself. Snape could apparently barely stand to look at her, let alone hurl insults at her, but for her friends, who Snape persisted in being nasty to. Her one experience of him as a substitute defense professor had been less than enjoyable. Well, look on the bright side, Ron. There's no way Snape would only want to stay for a year, the curse is going to get him for sure. Ginny said. That might almost be worth it, Ron said wistfully. You know, this Muggle food is pretty good, Remus Tonks said, as she finished her third slice of pizza. I figured you'd like it. How's Maya doing, are the two of you still? Remus asked. We're figuring it out. You know, she's still a little, well, she's had some hard times. After Rowan, crazy lass wants to come get involved in this mess. Probably will, too, Tonks said. I'm sure. It's good to hear she still has someone, Remus said, and then he and Tonks were too far away for Holly to listen in on any more. Holly, over here, George said, beckoning her over to a corner. She walked over cautiously, half expecting something to explode or start singing. Just wanted to give our partner and investor-in-chief a little update. Now that we have some starting cash, we've been able to set up a very efficient little owl order system. Still have to get it around, Mum, but that's now we've got a little warehouse off Dagon, Fred said. You know, I think you could probably win her around if you made a few useful things. Probably a good idea to expand your brand, anyway, Holly said. It could be worth a shot, you know. Reckon that shield hat idea might be worth selling in this climate, George said. We could never get the runes to work with the small surface area, what about shifting to a cloak design? That way we could offer full body protection, too, Fred suggested. I think you might be onto something, both of you, George said. Holly spent the days after her birthday relaxing, but soon enough she was starting back up her extracurricular lessons with Sirius and Remus. She had improved dramatically in only a year, to the point that her guardians were no longer holding back in terms of skill. Their practice duels were full of silent spells and attempts to sneak into each other's minds. Hey, Holly, it's honestly kind of boring here, mind if we join in on this? Ron asked after one practice session. Holly was a little taken aback, but she wasn't opposed to the idea. Let me ask Sirius and Remus, but I'm sure they'd be fine with it. You know Remus loves teaching, Holly said, and her words proved correct. Remus was reserved in agreeing to the idea, but Holly could tell he was excited. Fred and George ended up joining in, as well as Hermione, Ginny, and Ron. You know, Holly, it might be a good idea for you to help teach some of this stuff, Sirius said. Me? But you two are way more experienced, Holly said. And you're as good as us at 15. Probably better, when it's life or death. Besides, there are things you can only learn by teaching other people, or something like that. Remus is always going on about it, Sirius said, and so Holly had the very bizarre experience of helping to plan a lesson for her friends. Chapter 79, Year 5, Chapter 6. Chapter Text. So, one of the most important things to learn if you want to be good at this kind of stuff is how to flow from one spell to next, Holly said, as her friends watched on. Sirius and Remus were there too, but they were hanging back for now. I've seen spell chains mentioned in advanced defense books, Hermione said. Spell chains are sort of like that. They teach them in Dada because they are good enough for most people, but if you remember my duel with Ermeline last year, you can see how they have some fatal weaknesses, Holly explained. Oh, yeah, it was kinda like your mind-reading thing, only for one spell, Ron said. Yeah, it's not something you want to get caught in. So, today we're gonna do an exercise to help you learn to flow between spells. I want you to cast as many spells as you can without resetting, no need for speed right now, but you can't cast the same spell more than once. Ready? Holly asked, and her friends nodded. She led them through it, and managed not to wince as they took a good 10 seconds to think of what spell they could cast without a reset sometimes. After about 5 rounds of that, they were showing progress. Not a lot, but for a bunch of 15 and 14-year-olds, they'd done well. Right, Now Holly's gone and done the boring stuff, time for a little action," Sirius said, and they soon paired off. Firstly they matched a student against an instructor, Holly against Ginny, Sirius against Ron, and Remus against Hermione. There are essentially two kinds of practice duel, the competitive spar, and the learning experience against a teacher. Both types were important, because skill rarely developed without actual resistive training, and two neophytes could teach each other bad habits. "You are seriously good at this stuff," Ginny said. "I've had a lot of help," Holly said, shrugging her shoulders. Then they started. Spells flashed all around the room, and Holly launched a fierce but measured attack on her girlfriend. She was just a little slower, a little easier to read, and made sure to punish any mistakes Ginny made with a harmless but amusing jinx. She was impressed when Ginny used her Animagus transformation to avoid one of Holly's spells, transforming fluidly into her Goshawk form and back out of it. "Nice one, Ginny," Holly said, and she flushed a little at the wide smile of Ginny's face. After that, Ron, Hermione, and Ginny were led through shorter matches against one another whilst Sirius duelled with Holly. Theirs was a much fiercer match, with none of the careful slowness Holly had used against Ginny. She probed at Sirius's mind, as did he hers, but neither could penetrate the other's mind, so their duel, at such close quarters, was fought in the traditional wizardly fence of hex and shield. Jets of light, whips of flame, and more passed between them, though their duels were relatively brief. At this shorter range, without cover, 30 seconds was a long duel. Holly noticed, as they called the session over, that she had actually won a slight majority of their duels. "You did amazingly, kid. Both at the teaching thing, and with the dueling," Sirius said. "I had some good teachers," Holly said, smiling. "Flattery won't get you far with me," Sirius said, jokingly. "I was talking about Remus and Mad-Eye," Holly said, sticking out her tongue to a chorus of laughter. Later that evening, Holly and her friends were hanging out in her room. She and Ginny were cuddled up on Holly's bed, whilst Ron and Hermione were half paying attention to a game of chess and half to one of their friendly bickering sessions. "Living with Sirius must be a laugh, yeah?" Ron asked. "It's great. Before, I could basically do whatever I wanted. They showed me a bunch of cool stuff in Muggle London, too," Holly said. "He does seem the type to know that kinda thing," Ginny said. "Yeah, it was kinda sad, though. I think a lot of his Muggle friends from back then died while he was in Azkaban," Holly said, feeling a little awkward about the subject. She didn't really want to explain it to Ron and Ginny. "Oh, of course," Hermione said sadly. "Mind filling the rest of us in?" Ron asked. "There was a Muggle epidemic whilst Sirius was in Azkaban," Hermione, clearly also not wanting to explain the specifics of the AIDS crisis. "Oh. Merlin, that's some rotten luck for him," though, Ginny said. Holly's days at Grimmauld Place passed much more pleasantly than they had at Privet Drive. She attended more order meetings, continued to practice her dueling, and spent most of her time just relaxing with her friends. They pitched in several times to help the twins with their products, and Holly was amazed to see Hermione enjoy herself immensely with it. The election for the new minister would finally happen on the first weekend back at Hogwarts, and Holly felt a dread growing as she read the papers each day. More and more people seemed to be won over by Scrimgeour's xenophobic rhetoric as the days went by, and Madam Bones' once commanding lead in the polls had shrunk to a very narrow margin. Hogwarts owls descended on Grimmauld Place a week before they were due to return to Hogwarts. Holly, Ginny, and Hermione all woke to a veritable parliament of owls outside their window, and Holly eagerly took her book list from one of the owls, gave it an owl treat, and then gave Hedwig one. Hermione let out a wordless cry of joy, and Holly saw the shiny prefect's badge slide out of her friend's letter. Holly smiled as she saw it. She had been fairly certain that Hermione would be picked over her. Not that she would have minded having constant access to the prefect's bathroom after her brief stint in there last year, but Hermione was far more suited to the job. "Congratulations, Hermione," Holly said. "I thought for sure it was going to be you." Hermione said. "Nah, you're way better for it than me. But, if you felt like slipping me the password to that awesome bathroom," Holly said, and they all laughed. Holly was surprised to see that Snape's defense text wasn't some awful tome, but rather a book she remembered as a sober and slim look at magical self-defense. Maybe he'd be halfway tolerable this year for her friends, and if he wasn't, Holly realized with a start that she could probably just teach them herself. She'd enjoyed doing that this summer, anyway. Her perusal of the book list was interrupted by a frantic knocking at the door. Holly opened it with a wave of her hand, and the twins spilled into the room. "You three have got to come see this." Ron got his book list at the table, "and the little traitor has gone over to the dark side," Fred said. "What?" Ginny asked. "Bloody Git's gone and been made a prefect," George said. Holly blinked. It sounded so bizarre, but as she ran through the candidates in her head, she could see Dumbledore's logic. Ron might not be as studious as Hermione, but he was a good bloke who could keep calm in a stressful situation. "I can see that, actually," Holly said. "Those private lessons with Dumbledore has turned you just as mad as him, mate," Fred said, shaking his head. They all descended the massive spiral staircase and made their way into the kitchen, where Mrs. Weasley was making breakfast with tears of joy in her eyes. Ron looked dazed at the table, staring at the badge with a disbelieving look. "Oh, have you three heard? Ron's been made a prefect," Mrs. Weasley said, smiling broadly as she scrambled a half-dozen eggs. "We heard, Mum." "Hermione's won too," Ginny said. "Congratulations, dear. You're the obvious choice, of course, always so well behaved, such a good influence," Mrs. Weasley said, looking subtly at Holly. She smiled back, and the Weasley matriarch relaxed just a tiny bit. "Still not quite sure what Dumbledore was thinking," Ron said. "Oh, stop that, Ronald. He clearly recognizes your potential. You've been applying yourself more these last few years, you know." Holly just nodded and said it made sense when we told her. "We think she might be in danger of making cryptic statements and pretending to be balmy soon," George said. "I think Dumbledore just trusts you more to take care of the first years if there's an emergency than Neville," Holly said, shrugging her shoulders. He was the only other candidate amongst the three dorms rooms of fifth-year Gryffindor boys she could think of. "Neville?" Ron asked, confused. "Remember the end of first year? How Dumbledore gave him the winning points for standing up to us?" Holly said. "He did sound pretty impressed, I guess," Ron said. Holly focused on eating her breakfast as Mrs. Weasley collected the letters from everyone and promised to get Ron a new Clenseep broom as a reward for being made a prefect. She was happy for her friends, but she felt a little weird about how quickly a thing like that had stopped mattering to her. Even a year ago, she probably would have been disappointed to have Hermione chosen over her. "You're brooding again," Ginny said, as Holly finished her toast. "I am not. I'm eating my breakfast in respectable silence," Holly said. "Nope. As an expert in this sort of thing, I can say with confidence you're brooding," Ginny said. "Maybe a little," Holly said, as everyone else continued to talk about Ron and Hermione. "Wanna go talk about it?" Ginny asked, and Holly nodded. They both headed up the large spiral staircase at the heart of number 12 Grimmauld Place. The whole house was a testament to the impossible nightmare of wizarding architecture. It was a warren of endless rooms, passageways, and hidden staircases. Holly and Ginny climbed up into the small tower at the very top of the house. It was a bizarre feature, and held nothing other than a rickety old bench in its tight confines. They could see for a long way from here, gazing out at a sea of slate-grey roofs and distant glass towers. The wind blew a little, but it was otherwise a perfect summer's day. "Everything all right, Holly?" Ginny asked as they sat down. "Not really. But that's it so unusual for me, is it?" Holly replied. Ginny's hand grasped Holly's softly, and they both stared out at the endless expanse of Muggle London. "I know you don't like talking about this kind of stuff with anyone." I don't, either. I hate it when my mum gives me that sad look after she sees me flinch at a self-writing quill, and I still haven't talked about him with anyone but you." "Not really," Ginny said, and Holly didn't look at her. Ginny hated letting people see her cry. She just held her girlfriend's hand gently. "I messed up really badly, Ginny. I almost got Penny and Jane killed, and if it hadn't been for Dobby," Holly said. It was pretty dumb. But not even you can do everything right all the time. You're not some storybook hero, like the you I grew up reading about. You're a person, and people make mistakes. Are you gonna do it again?" Ginny asked. "Of course not," Holly said, a little angrily. So why are you spending your summer brooding about it? Is this what it's really about? Ginny asked, her voice low. No, Holly admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It's a lot of different things, I guess. Everything that happened at the graveyard, my stupid, ugly, body, Holly said. You are not ugly. You stop that nonsense right now, young lady, Ginny said, and Holly noticed with a start that seemed genuinely upset. I am, though. I'm basically just a skinny boy with a stuffed bra. I feel like a creep whenever I wear the clothes I actually like. I mean, I look like a footballer in drag whenever I wear a dress, Holly said. So what if you're not stacked like Susan Bones, Holly? Newsflash, that's normal. You have basically the same build as Cho Chang, and you were making little moony-eyed faces at her for an entire year. And there's no rule that says you can't be all lithe and athletic and a girly girl at the same time, Ginny said. I am not a girly girl, Holly said on instinct. Her voice was harsh, and she felt a moment of bizarre panic. Oh, and I suppose I imagined that cupboard full of makeup and potions and muggle stuff I barely recognize. Your closet full of dresses and weird fancy underwear and rich girl things. Just because you love Quidditch and adventures doesn't mean you can't also love that stuff, Holly, Ginny said. I know. It's just, sometimes I'm fine, and I know all that stuff. Some days just getting dressed in the morning makes me so happy, because I get to be me and I do stupid little spins in the mirror. Some days I hate everything about me and have to shower in the dark because I can't stand to look at myself. I'm sorry you have to deal with my dumb bullshit, Holly said. I'm not, Holly. You never complain about how I wake up screaming, afraid I'm back there. You never judged me for admitting that sometimes I miss my friend, Tom Riddle. You were there for me in the darkest moment of my life, so by all the powers I will be there to help you deal with it. Whether you want me to or not, I'll be there to tell you that your mind is a lying bitch, and that you're a goddamn beautiful, elegant girl. I'll be there to hold you when you feel like you're back in that graveyard. I'll be there. I'll be there because I love you, Holly, Ginny said. The wind picked up, carrying all the sounds of the city with it. Cars drove by, birds squawked, and people shouted. It seemed as if they were trapped in a moment that would go on forever, like a held breath that was never released. Holly gathered her courage, ignoring the screaming in her head that she was a freak. I love you too, Ginny, Holly said, and she kissed her softly. It felt like they were utterly alone, entirely away from all the concerns and horrors of the wider world. Holly wanted to stay on this uncomfortable old bench forever, though she knew she would have to go down and rejoin the world soon enough. For now she simply savored this moment, committing every detail to memory. When she faced the world again, she would have the memory of this moment on the tower, and that would be enough. Chapter 80, Year 5, Chapter 7. Chapter text. Where have you two been? Ron asked when Holly and Ginny came downstairs once more. Snogging furiously, Ronald, Ginny said, and Ron made a face. Don't ask if you know you won't like the answer, brother, Ginny continued. Is that your new broom, Ron? Holly asked, hoping to steer the conversation out of dangerous waters. Ron was indeed holding a brand new Clenseep, and he beamed when Holly asked about it. Yeah, the new Clenseep 11. Not as fast as your Firebolt, course, but it's a really good keeper's broom, Ron said, eagerly. Yeah, which broomstick said it was very maneuverable. Would always swore by them, Holly said. Really? Excellent. He might have been totally balmy, but he was a great keeper, Ron said. The rest of the afternoon passed in amicable conversation, and Holly had great fun at the party Mrs. Weasley threw for Ron and Hermione. Ron still seemed slightly baffled that he'd been chosen, but Holly knew that hearing his parents' praise meant a lot to him. With so many talented and accomplished older brothers, it was hard for him to stand out. Of course, some of his older brothers had been prefects too, but Holly thought that Ron had managed to stand out a bit with Fred and George breaking up the pattern. Those two had been talking in low voices with Mundungus Fletcher, and Holly was about to head over to see what was happening when Moody approached her. How are things, Potter? Moody asked, and Holly blinked. That sounded utterly bizarre coming out of Moody's mouth. Oh, you know, they're all right, Holly said. Hey, not really one for small talk. I appreciate that. Dumbledore asked me to go over the security for next week with you, Moody said. Next week, oh, the trip back to Hogwarts, right. Holly asked. Got it in one, Potter. We'll go in 2 parties, one with the luggage and most of the people, and another with you. Black, Lupin, and I will go with you to King's Cross via apparition directly from here, with a guard flying over the larger party as they take cars there. Tonks and Kingsley will be at the station as part of the new security measures there if we get called away. Stick with them, Moody explained, and Holly nodded. Sounds simple enough, I suppose. Not that I don't appreciate being told, but, Holly asked, unsure how to put her question into words. Why am I taking you aside to tell you a week early? We're leaking that you're not in the cars to help one of our double agents out. Dumbledore thinks neither Riddle will risk attacking the station with as much security as it'll have, but best be on guard just in case, Moody said. I understand. What about the train itself? Holly asked. She knew that'd be her choice of target, rather than the fortified position of Hogwarts, or the heavily patrolled station. Ministry's flying 2 squads of hit wizards overhead the whole trip. Unannounced, but we're fairly certain that the only part of the DMLE that isn't leaking like a fucking sieve is the Era office, Moody said. What are you detaining my goddaughter in a dark corner for, Mad-Eye? Sirius asked. Just going over the security for next week with her, Black Moody said, and then he paused for a moment. His enchanted eye whirled around in its socket, and Moody grinned a little. Ah, that's where it is, he said, and headed upstairs. Does he do that a lot? Holly asked. All the time, Sirius said, shaking his head. Holly was having a much better time at Grimmauld Place than she'd been having at Privet Drive, but staying in the house at all times was beginning to wear on her. At least she could go up to the roof every now and then to get some sunlight because the rest of the house was still somewhat dark and foreboding. Sirius and Remus had done what they could to redecorate, but the extension charms and the warren of rooms and hallways they created were very hard to tinker with. During her last week before Hogwarts, Holly started on a little project. She had to borrow some books on runes from Hermione, and consult several volumes from the Black Library, but Holly managed a very basic extension charm on her trunk. She had great fun using her wand to pack, casting charm after charm to make her clothes float out of her closet and neatly fold themselves. I can't believe I let Mum trick me into thinking the Ministry'd catch us for years, Ginny said, her own trunk long since packed. That law really needs to be amended, Hermione said, crossing her arms. It would have been nice to do magic at the Dursleys, even just to work on charms or something. Though maybe your mum had the right idea when it came to the twins, Holly said. Okay, yeah, I'd trick the twins into thinking they couldn't get away with magic at home too, Ginny said. Girls, are you ready? Mrs. Weasley shouted from downstairs. Holly waved her wand once more, and her last few possessions neatly placed themselves in her trunk. The lid shut by itself, and Holly felt very smug. It had taken her a while to get so good at packing charms. We're ready, Mum. Ginny shouted back. All 3 of them dragged their trunks downstairs, to join a massive collection of trunks, cages, though Hedwig and the other owls had flown to Hogwarts already, and miscellaneous possessions. See you at the station, I guess, Holly said, as Ginny and Hermione joined the mass of Weasleys getting ready to leave. Half a dozen Order members were already waiting around with brooms, but of her 3 guards for the trip, Holly could only see Mad-Eye. She still made her way over, but she had to dodge a few careless elbows and negotiate some tight spaces. Where's Sirius and Remus? Holly asked. Taking a shift, keeping watch outside. Come with me, Potter, I want to show you something, Moody said, and Holly followed him. He led her up to the 2nd-floor living room, which had a large window looking out into the street. Holly could see the faint shimmers in the air of Sirius and Remus under a disillusionment charm, and she smiled slightly. What did you want to show me? Holly asked. Well now, it could have been anything. I could have taken some polyjuice and been here to kidnap you. You need to exercise constant vigilance, Potter, Moody said, and Holly's eyes narrowed. Is this just a safety lecture or? Holly asked, though her wrist was about half an inch from activating the charms on her forearm wand holster. Don't get snippy with me, girl. But I did have something to show you, Moody said, taking out an old wizarding photograph and handing it to Holly. She saw perhaps 30 people all in place for a group picture, and her eyes went wide as she started to recognize some of them. Her parents, hand in hand. Sirius, Remus, and Peter Pettigrew very obviously trying not to laugh. She flinched a little seeing him again, seemingly the best of friends with her parents, Sirius, and Remus. "Is this the original Order of the Phoenix?" Holly asked, curiously. "It is. You might not know all of them, that's Marlene McKinnon, she died 2 weeks after taking this," Moody began, and Holly felt a coldness in her stomach grow as he explained all the unfamiliar faces in that crowd. More than half of them had been dead by the end of the war, and Holly couldn't help but cast her mind around Grimmauld Place, thinking which half of the people here would die before it was all over. "Why did you show me this now, Mad-Eye?" Holly asked. "Because you might get the temptation to go do something dumb again this year at Hogwarts. I don't want to be telling some cherubic chipmunk in 20 years that their dear mommy died so Holly Potter could go to a party," Moody said, and Holly felt like she'd been slapped in the face. Nobody on their side and died that night, not even her cousin Dudley, and yet it would have been so easy for it to go wrong. It was only chance, really, that had avoided that. "Enough people have died for me, Mad-Eye. I'm not eager to add any more," Holly said quietly. "We'll see," Moody said, and he turned to leave. "Keep that, and be ready to leave in 10 minutes," Moody said, and Holly almost collapsed as soon as he'd left. She sat down on an old armchair and looked out the large, circular window. She sat mutely and watched her friends leave, the photograph still in her hands. They got into 3 anonymous-looking cars, clearly enchanted to carry far more than they usually could, and drove away. Holly remembered Ginny's words and resolved not to let Mad-Eye get to her. He was a bitter old bastard, anyway, and it wasn't like she was going to do anything like that again. She'd been good and stayed behind the ward line for the rest of the summer, and soon she'd be at Hogwarts, where any trouble would have to get past stronger defenses than the wards of number 12 Grimmauld Place. "Ready, Holly?" Sirius called out from the main hallway, and Holly got up. She walked downstairs and saw Sirius, Remus, and Moody all standing by the door. "I'm ready," she said. Sirius held out a hand, and she took it. All 4 of them disappeared with the crack of apparition, and Holly felt as if she was being squeezed through a very tight space. In an instant, Holly found herself just outside of platform 9 3/4, in some kind of waiting room. Frosted glass covered the windows, and Holly saw a small sign on the inside of the door, "Approved Apparition Point. Please ensure your clothing is Muggle appropriate before leaving." "Where are we?" Holly asked. "The Ministry has a few of these rooms ready every September so people can apparate in without appearing in front of 100 Muggles. The actual platform has permanent anti-apparition wards all over it," Remus explained. "I guess that makes sense," Holly said. "Stay behind us when we cross the station itself," Potter Moody said, and Holly nodded. She kept a careful eye out as they crossed the 100 meters or so of Muggle Station between them and the entrance to platform 9 3/4. She saw the Muggle police standing a watchful guard, not the ordinary unarmed officers, either, but ones carrying submachine guns and wearing bulletproof vests. She spotted several Aurors too, wearing their distinctive coats and obviously keeping watch. When one of them spoke to a police officer upon seeing her, Holly flinched. She felt ridiculous with so much protection, and wondered what the Muggle police had been told, "Shoot anyone in a skull mask." She breathed a sigh of relief when she crossed through the barrier, but the once familiar platform was just as heavily guarded. All the fires had been put out, and thick iron grates covered them. Hit wizards in full uniform, wands out, stood guard near the entrance and cast dark magic detection charms on everybody passing through. 2 Aurors Holly didn't recognize were going over the luggage compartments with a fine-toothed comb, casting much more sophisticated dark detection charms and making use of a number of odd-looking devices. "This way, sirs," one of the hit wizards said, waving Holly and her guards through the line. Moody looked like he was about to insist they be checked as well, but a look from Sirius stopped him. They were quickly on the other side of the line of hit wizards, and then all there was to do was wait for the Weasleys and Hermione to arrive. Holly had got there nearly an hour early, and so she had plenty of time to watch people come through the entrance. She felt a growing, quiet melancholy as she saw all the Muggle-born firsties, how they looked ever so slightly fearful. She remembered how amazed she had felt walking into platform 9 3/4, even after seeing Diagon Alley, for the first time. Now that childlike wonder and amazement had been replaced with uncertainty and fear. Eventually, the Weasleys did arrive. After all their trunks were checked, and Holly was glad that they were only checking for dark artifacts, not fire whiskey bottles or books on dark magic, Holly and her friends got a compartment. "Ron and I have to go to the prefect's carriage," Hermione said apologetically after Ginny and Holly sat down. "It's okay. We'll save you a seat, yeah?" Holly asked, and Ron nodded. The two of them left to go patrol the corridors, or whatever it actually was that prefects did on the express, and Holly found herself alone with Ginny. It was kind of creepy, seeing platform 9 3/4 like that, Ginny said. "There were Aurors talking to the Muggle police in King's Cross too, I think," Holly replied quietly. "Were there? I suppose they were carrying those, what are they called?" Ginny asked, making vague hand motions. "Guns," Holly answered with a little uncertainty. "Yeah. Anyway, enough of that depressing stuff, we have a compartment on the train all to ourselves," Ginny said with a grin, and got closer to Holly as she pulled down the blinds. Their lips had just touched when the compartment door opened, and Luna Lovegood walked in. "Oh, I hope we weren't interrupting. Neville and I were looking for a compartment, you see," Luna said. Everyone other than Luna was blushing a furious red. "Sure, come on in," Holly managed, as Ginny moved back into her seat as fast as she could. Neville and Luna sat down as the train began to accelerate out of King's Cross. Holly was heading back to Hogwarts for another year, and she allowed herself a small smile at that. Chapter 81, Year 5, Chapter 8. Chapter text. "Is it true you've been living in the secret Potter Castle this summer, Holly?" Luna asked her, and Holly tried very hard not to laugh. No, I don't think there is a secret Potter Castle. Inventing Sleeky as his hair potion didn't make my grandfather quite that much money," Holly explained. "I shall have to tell Daddy to discard that source, then. She was always so reliable with her Nagel sightings, but clearly, she's fallen victim to the Rotfang conspiracy," Luna said sadly. "The Rotfang conspiracy?" Holly asked, as Ginny frantically shook her head from behind Luna. "Oh, Holly, it runs to the very core of our society," Luna began, and Holly was regaled with a very in-depth tale of a vampire dentist conspiracy to take over the world. Somewhere Minister Fudge's army of heliopaths, now, without their master, Rouge heliopaths, got involved. It was all ridiculous, of course, and Holly was slightly worried about Luna. She had always seemed so odd, but the older she got the less charming believing in Nagels was. Holly was very familiar with being so deep in denial you'd rather live in a painful fantasy than face the truth. She wanted to say some clever thing that would help Luna deal with whatever made the world of the Quibbler look appealing to her, but Holly hardly knew her. She felt the temptation, then, to simply dive into her mind. It would be easy, now. Holly could do it on instinct, slipping into instinct and thought with the barest glance. When she had fought her way out of the ambush near Privet Drive, she had done it without a second thought. Could she do it now to one of her friends, even if it was to help them? Holly let the probe fade and smiled at Luna. That was a line Holly did not want to cross, and she instead resolved to pay more attention to the curious Ravenclaw girl. It was very clear to her that Luna was lonely, and aside from her odd ideas, she really was very nice. Charming and personable, yes, but also kind and open in a way very few were. Holly knew that her housemates were not very fond of her, and wondered for a few moments if Luna would not have been better suited towards Hufflepuff. There, Holly was sure, Luna would have been well liked. In the cold, academic environs of Ravenclaw Tower, Holly was less sure that Luna would ever be able to make many friends. "Miss us much?" Ron asked as he opened the compartment door. "Nah," Ginny said, sticking out her tongue at him. "Well, we bloody well missed you. We had to spend the last hour with Daphne Greengrass and that Zabinai guy," Ron said. "It can't have been that bad," Holly said. "Even Hannah looked like she wanted hex somebody," Hermione said, and Holly smiled faintly. It looked like she'd avoided some unpleasant company by not becoming a prefect after all. "Glad they only kept you an hour, though. It's not a proper trip to Hogwarts without you," Holly said. "Same, mate. I'm starved. You get anything off the trolley?" Ron asked. "Check above your seat. I also made sandwiches for lunch, there should be enough for you two as well," Holly said, turning towards Neville and Luna. "I didn't know you could cook," Luna said, sounding genuinely surprised. "It's not that odd," Holly said, faintly embarrassed. I always assumed Mr. Black had a whole staff on hand, Neville said. The Dursleys made me do it all the time, but I honestly didn't mind it, mostly because they'd leave me alone to figure it out. Then, well, Sirius doesn't have a staff or anything like that, and he really can't cook, Holly explained. He did spend a decade or so in Azkaban, Hermione said. What's Remus's excuse, then? Holly replied. They continued to banter for a while, a familiar sense falling over the compartment. This was always one of Holly's favorite times of the year, returning to the magical world, seeing her friends again. They were all good memories. About the only thing missing from this year, she thought, was a rude interruption from Malfoy. A sudden, disturbing sadness struck her as she realized that there would never again be a rude interruption from the silver-haired Git. He had died in utter, complete agony as his face melted away, only to be replaced with a creature wearing his form. He had failed at the last moment, unable to cast the locket into the cursed fire, and had been consumed utterly for his failure. She had hated him, or at least what she thought had been hate. It seemed utterly childish to her now to hate someone over a schoolyard rivalry. Malfoy had been a bigot, yes, but he had been a child. An 11-year-old repeating what he'd heard his parents say, who'd ultimately been destroyed by them. It seemed silly to hate him after the graveyard. After she had killed Crouch, and probably more of them. There had to have been signs, she thought. She remembered that conversation she'd overheard him having with Pansy Parkinson one night last year. She remembered his words and felt sick. Could she have stopped the second Voldemort from returning, she wondered. How many more memories had he left scattered in objects? How many more children would he try to consume to return to life, unaware he was already back? Dumbledore and Bill had both known something about them, something they had hidden even from the Order. What secret could be so awful as to require that? You all right, Holly? Ron asked. Oh, yeah. Just thinking, Holly said. Dangerous thing, that Ron said, and Holly smiled slightly. Liable to get me into trouble, Holly replied. Honestly, you too, Hermione said, shaking her head. Holly settled back into easy conversation, card games, and laughter as the weather outside darkened. It seemed almost tradition for her journey north every year to be accompanied by a storm of some kind, and the rumble of distant thunder as they crossed into Scotland seemed to confirm another stormy arrival. With perhaps an hour to go, Holly heard shouting and raised voices outside. She was keen to just ignore whatever argument was happening, but then she heard the distinctive sound of a spell being cast and leapt to her feet. What the hell is going on out there, she asked, and Ron, Hermione, and Ginny followed her out of the compartment. Luna seemed to judge that Holly had things in hand, and motioned Neville to stay with her. It's rather tight in the corridor. Why don't we stay here and you can help me with this runic crossword? Luna said, showing the puzzle in her edition of the Quibbler to Neville. Holly emerged to see what had to be a wall of students shouting at another group of students Holly couldn't see. She flicked out her wrist and felt the comforting warmth of her wand in her hand. Please go back to your compartments, Hermione said, to no apparent effect. All right, you lot, break it up. Ron shouted. People began to slip away at that, and Holly was able to see who was on the other side of the argument. Pansy Parkinson was in tears, clutching her wand, and screaming at Cho Chang. Cho looked like she was about an inch from cursing Pansy, and Holly could tell that she too was blinking back tears. When Pansy caught sight of Holly, however, she pushed past Cho. The physical shove caught Cho by surprise, and she stumbled long enough for Pansy to get past her. You! Pansy screamed, leveling her wand at Holly. What do you want, Pansy? Holly asked, affecting the same faux politeness she used to infuriate her relatives. This is all your fault. You took Draco from me. Pansy screamed, and Holly flinched a little. That had been a little too close to Holly's thoughts earlier. Pansy, I really am sorry about what happened to Draco. He didn't deserve it, and if I could have stopped it I would have. But I had nothing to do with what happened to him, Holly said, and she wasn't sure she'd believed it. Hadn't Sirius's old elf creature given the locket to the Malfoys? Hadn't she caught Pettigrew, which was why Sirius had been able to free him? Just like a mudblood bitch to avoid responsibility. You killed Draco so you and your poof blood traitor godfather could go, Pansy started, but at the mention of Sirius, Holly leveled her wand at Pansy. Pansy, I am willing to extend quite a lot of sympathy to you. I'm willing to overlook the fact that you've done nothing but call me a perverted freak for 3 years because you're an ignorant, bigoted little girl with shit parents. If you finish that sentence, we're going to have a problem, Holly said, her voice icy cold and calm. Pansy's wand was still pointed at Holly, but Holly could see the girl's hand tremble. She could see the fear in her eyes. She easily brushed aside the girl's rudimentary occlumency and listened to her instincts, considering if she should dive deeper. Pansy, Daphne Greengrass said, putting her hands on Pansy's wand hand. Pansy was breathing hard now, psyching herself up to act. Holly could tell the curses she was considering. If it had been just the two of them in an open area, Holly was of half a mind to let the girl cast her curse, but there was too much of a chance for a bystander to get hurt, here. Pansy lowered her wand and started to cry. It was an ugly, awful thing to watch. Holly had thought about making Pansy Parkinson cry in front of her stupid little gang more than a few times over her years at Hogwarts, but there was nothing to laugh at here. Only raw human misery, the most horrible sort of wound left behind by violence. Daphne dragged Pansy away, and the crowd began to thin out. Holly had wanted to do something, but what was there for her to do? Pansy Parkinson would never have accepted any help from her, would have slapped away any offered hand. You okay, Cho? Holly asked her, hoping she could at least help someone. I'm fine. Dumb bitch just wanted to scream at someone, and she thought she could hurt me, Cho said, not really looking at Holly as she turned and headed back to her compartment. Merlin, I thought she was really gonna try it, Ron said, shaking his head. When the train reached Hogsmeade Station, Holly was surprised to see just as heavy a ministry presence as at platform 9 3/4. It had indeed begun to rain heavily, and the hit wizards were all wearing identical uniform cloaks emblazoned with a white ministry M. Holly managed to conjure a passable umbrella, as did Hermione. Ron, Neville, and Luna joined the two of them under their conjured protection as they rushed towards the carriages. They found the first open carriage and got in, casting drying charms as the Thestrals slowly pulled the carriage through the castle gates and onto the grounds. Holly felt a familiar shiver as they passed over the ward line, the powerful defensive enchantments welcoming Holly back as surely as the carriages and the Thestrals. She was back at Hogwarts for another year, and she felt the tension that had been building up all summer release. Here she could have far more freedom than either Privet Drive or Grimmauld Place. Here she could fly across the grounds at night, or play Quidditch, or simply talk to all the friends she had made who weren't involved with the Order. Holly smiled broadly as she took her seat in the Great Hall, and listened to even the Sorting Hat's out-of-tune warning with fondness. It was good, she thought, to be back at Hogwarts. Chapter 82, Year 5, Chapter 9. Chapter Text. Welcome, all of you, to another year at Hogwarts. Welcome to those of you returning here, and most especially welcome to those who are here for the first time. Now that we have all had our fill of the delicious feast prepared for us, I have a few small announcements to make before you may head up to bed. Rejoining us this year is Professor Horace Sloane, who has kindly agreed to take back his old job as Potions Master, Dumbledore said, to a chorus of confused whispers. If they couldn't still see Snape sitting at the staff table, Holly was sure most of the school would have burst into cheers at the news he was being replaced. As I am sure many of you are wondering what has become of our dear Professor Snape, do not worry. It is no surprise to many of you that he has, year after year, requested to take up the position of Head of Defense Against the Dark Arts, a post that he shall occupy for this year, Dumbledore said, and Slytherin House burst into cheers. Holly actually saw Daphne Greengrass stand and begin to clap, only to be joined by most of her housemates. Our last change of staffing is that Professor Hagrid will be taking a brief leave of absence, his position to be filled by Professor Clark. Please make her feel welcome, Dumbledore said, pointing to a young witch dressed in brown, practical-looking robes. She had dark brown hair, tanned skin, and numerous freckles. Holly thought that she was rather pretty. On a less heartening note, I'm sure many of you noticed the increased security on the train. That security will extend to the castle itself, though you should not be overly worried. Hogwarts itself endured the previous war without attack or major incident. Here, you will be safe. I must ask all of you, however, to keep a watchful eye out. Not only for dark wizards and servants of Voldemort but for each other. This year will be a difficult one, and many of us will need our friends and housemates' help. It is only together that we will emerge from these dark times, Dumbledore said, and the mood in the Great Hall was as somber as a funeral. Holly watched Ron and Hermione herd the first years up the moving staircases, and she was struck by how small they seemed. It surely couldn't have been so long ago that she was walking up that staircase for the first time, could it? It struck her then that she had spent longer living as a witch rather than a wizard, and she smiled as she carefully stepped over the vanishing step. "How was your summer, Holly?" "We didn't get to see you at all," Lavender Brown asked her as they let the first years go ahead of them. Lavender's best friend, Parvati Patil, was standing next to her. "It was all right. Pretty boring, to be honest. You might think having dark wizards out to get you would make life exciting, but mostly it involves sitting around at home," Holly said. "Only you could get into a fight with a dozen shady warlocks and call it a boring summer," Parvati said. The rest of their conversation, as they slowly made their way up the stairs to Gryffindor Tower, was about more mundane topics. Holly made a conscious effort to fight down the occasional burst of disdain she still felt towards the two of them, disdain she knew was a manifestation of her own self-hatred and insecurity. They had never been anything but nice to her, welcoming her with only the briefest hesitation and giving her valuable lessons that she'd had very few other chances to learn. Holly walked up the girls' staircase and smiled as she did so. It was a normal, everyday thing for her now, but she still felt a small sense of validation every time she did. "You still really enjoy that, huh?" Ginny asked, standing outside the door to her dorm. "Yep," Holly said, and then she kissed her girlfriend goodnight. Holly woke that night to a fierce pain in her skull, and by instinct, she placed a silencing charm on her bed. She screamed without noise as she felt her forehead consumed by white-hot pain, her mind under assault from without. She could feel the probing touches at her mind along whatever connection she shared with Voldemort, only now there were two of them. Lockett Riddle and Voldemort seemed intent on using her connection to them as a battleground, and Holly concentrated on her own mental defenses. She slid behind a facade of emptiness, gritted her teeth, and let the two of them fight. If they both turned their wills on her, she knew she would be overwhelmed, but neither of them could take their attention from the other or be cast out. Holly sensed a moment of weakness from both of them and struck out. She sent memories of pain, pure sensation, distilled agony, along the link. Both Riddle and Voldemort reeled in shock. It seemed to her almost as if they had forgotten it was her mind they were fighting in, and she ejected them from her mind. She knew it was only a temporary thing, that they would be back in time, but hopefully not tonight. Then she felt a scrap of memory, and Holly saw Tom, the bartender of the Leaky Cauldron, lying dead on the floor of his pub. Wisps of green light, the residue of a powerful killing curse, rose from his chest. In the shards of broken glass near his corpse, Holly saw the reflection of Draco Malfoy, or rather, of the memory of Voldemort using his body. Draco's eyes were now red and slightly glowing, and his skin was ashen and deathly pale. She cancelled the silencing charm with a snap of her fingers, not even bothering to pick up her wand, and called her clothes to her. In seconds, she had changed out of her pajamas and into her clothes. She shrugged on her basilisk skin coat and rushed out of her dorm room, hearing confused noises behind her. Expecto Patronum. Dumbledore, Riddle's about to attack Diagon Alley. Holly shouted as she conjured her silvery doe, which raced off with her message into the night and towards the headmaster's office. Holly ran down the girls' stairs and out of the common room, checked to see if anyone was watching, and transformed into her raven form. She flew with supernatural speed, her wings calling up wind to let her fly faster than any normal raven. Holly flew up the grand staircase, saving precious seconds by taking a direct route, and arrived outside of the headmaster's office just after her patroness did. She transformed back into her own form just out of sight of the statue of a gargoyle that guarded the way to Dumbledore's office and raced around the final corner to see it already swinging open. "Professor," Holly began, but Dumbledore cut her off. "Holly. Are you sure of this? That you are not being influenced or misled?" Dumbledore asked, and she nodded. The two of them were fighting through their connection to me. I managed to get them to back off, but I think Riddle isn't quite as talented at occlumency as Voldemort, Holly said. "Of course. I will alert the Ministry and head to Diagon Alley myself." "Remain here," and Dumbledore began, but Holly cut him off. "I'm coming with you. You know I'm good enough to be a real help, Holly said, and though she had not formalized the idea in her mind before she spoke, she was certain that she had to go. She couldn't just sit around and wait to hear what had happened. Dumbledore looked at her for a few moments. I have no doubt as to your skill, Holly, but only that exposing you is an unnecessary risk. This could still be a trap designed to lure you out, Dumbledore said. Even if it is, sir, he'll stick around for that. You'll have a real chance at him, and maybe we can stop this riddle before he really gets a following, Holly said, and Dumbledore nodded. Then if you are sure, Dumbledore said, and held out a hand to Holly. She took it, and she saw Fawkes fly out of the staircase leading up to Dumbledore's office. He landed on the headmaster's shoulder, and Holly heard Phoenix' song. She felt a flash of incredible heat, and then she was somewhere else. Holly had felt something attempt to stop them, some skin of energy that Fawkes had passed through, an anti-apparition jinx, she thought. Fawkes had transported them to a small side alley roughly halfway down the length of Diagon Alley, and Holly saw Dumbledore begin to cast some incredibly complicated spell she only partially recognized. Diagon Alley was in chaos. The leaky cauldron was burning, and illuminated against the flames were dozens of witches and wizards in dark, ragged robes and leathers. They did not wear the skull-masked uniform of Voldemort's Death Eaters, nor any sort of uniform. Holly saw that many of them were wearing crude armbands depicting symbols she was unfamiliar with, and there seemed to be quite a few different ones. Several people lay dead just outside the burning pub, and Holly could see a ragged line of ordinary witches and wizards, along with half a dozen Ministry-hit wizards taking cover behind an improvised barricade. She and Dumbledore were squarely in the no-man's land between the two sides, and she felt her heart race. Someone flew overhead on a broom, casting curses without the slightest care as to what they hit, and Holly thrust her wand up into the sky. A bolt of lightning shot up from it and struck the tail of the broom, blowing it into hundreds of burning twigs. The figure screamed and crashed into a burning shop front with a wet crunching noise. Behind me, Holly, Dumbledore said, finally finished with whatever spell he had been casting with his muttered incantations and muted wand movements. Holly felt the magic of the place shift, then, and she knew what Dumbledore had done. The dark clouds overhead burst into rain, providing the two of them with a shield they could use against any killing curses cast by the attackers. Dumbledore walked out into the alley proper, his wand in his hand, and Holly was only a few steps behind him. She deflected a few dark curses sent their way instinctually, and a few panicked stunning spells from the barricades. Neither side seemed to have identified them as the rain began to fall, the burning pub and the distant Muggle city lights providing the only light. It was foolish of you to come here, Tom, Dumbledore said, his voice somehow cutting through the din of blasting curses. It wasn't magically loud like Holly had seen other wizards do from time to time, but rather, like Fawkes' Phoenix song, it simply seemed to demand to be heard over other sounds. Holly saw him, then. A young man in fine black robes, a yew wand in his hand, with a head of platinum blonde hair. The only way she could tell that it wasn't just Malfoy standing there, utterly out of place, was his glowing red eyes. Not all, Dumbledore. Though I am curious as to how you arrived so soon, I shall have to locate your pet traitor, it seems. Avada Kedavra. Riddle shouted, but Dumbledore merely flicked his wand and a stream of rainwater intercepted the bolt of killing green light. It exploded into hissing, green-tinged steam, and Holly used the distraction to step out of the shadows. You should really learn not to leave things lying around, Tom, Holly said, and she conjured a whip of white-hot flames and slashed it across the entire front line of Riddle's fighters. Most of their shield charms held, but not all, and the hit wizards jumped out from their barricade to fire off a barrage of curses. Half a dozen of the dark wizards fell then, but the distraction was only momentary. Holly was soon forced to fend off a half-dozen dark curses, and she too called on the rainwater to shield her. She wove into complex swirling patterns, each reforming as it was destroyed by a curse. Some spells were unaffected by the water, and those she deflected with barriers of shimmering light. Dumbledore and Riddle seemed unconcerned with the grander fight, and Holly knew how far she still had to go as she saw their duel. Dumbledore animated dozens of mannequins to storm towards Riddle with only a flick of his wand, but Riddle merely laughed and slashed down with his wand. Snakes formed from the inferno engulfing the leaky cauldron lashed out at the enchanted mannequins, burning them to ash in moments. Holly wanted to leap in and help, even so, but she could not even spare a moment to attack Riddle's fighters, let alone the man himself. Most of them favored blasting curses and cutting hexes, cursed fire and crackling bolts of lightning. The skill and power to cast a true killing curse was rare, even amongst dark wizards. Her glittering domes of energy and patterns of floating water protected her, but Holly saw with horror a bright green bolt of light strike a portly wizard on the barricades. The killing curse cut through his shield charm without resistance, and the wizard fell dead instantly. She tore her eyes away from Dumbledore and Riddle and rushed to stand before the barricade. She used every trick Dumbledore had taught her in the past year to try and stem the tide of dark curses, and thanks to the spell Dumbledore had cast she had an ever-replenishing supply of water to physically block curses with. The wizards on the barricades gave Holly just a moment to cast an offensive spell, and so she hissed in Parseltongue and whipped black lightning across the few dark wizards who were yet to take cover. Their mediocre shield charms were no use against the powerful dark curse, and several of them screamed in agony as they lost limbs. Two of them weren't even that lucky, falling silent as they collapsed dead to the wet paving stones. Dumbledore had pushed Riddle back, now, his transfigured creatures and powerful spells too much for this younger Riddle. Try as Riddle might, none of his animated glass daggers or bolts of black lightning could touch Dumbledore, and he was increasingly more desperate as he defended himself from grasping stone arms and angry whips of white-hot fire. Holly felt the anti-apparition jinx fade, and Riddle disappeared with barely a sound. His fighters looked around confused, and Holly charged forward. She abandoned all of her defensive efforts as she slipped into the instincts of the dark wizards at the other end of the alley, and she cast stunning spells and blasting hexes with ferocious speed. The hit wizards at the barricade joined her, rushing over it and charging forward with well-practiced maneuvers where one of them would shield another two. The ordinary wizards and witches there too stood up and fired a barrage of eclectic spells towards the dark wizards. Holly saw everything from ordinary stunning charms to a reductor curse to a shoelace strangling hex flying over her head. One by one, the dark wizards disappeared to follow their master in retreat. Just before the last of them could disappear, a half-dozen hit wizards on brooms screamed overheard and thoroughly plastered the place they had been with dozens of blasting curses. The Ministry reinforcements had arrived just as the battle had ended, and Holly felt like laughing. Instead, she helped a grim-faced Dumbledore put out the inferno engulfing the leaky cauldron as more and more Ministry reinforcements arrived too late. Witches and wizards in the white robes of healers pulled bodies from the wreckage of the front of the alley, and a few from the barricades. Holly noticed with a stab of surprise that the portly man she'd seen hit by a killing curse was Florian Fortescue, who she had talked with more than once at his ice cream shop. It seemed absurd for such a jolly, good-natured man to be killed like this, for him to be involved at all. What, she wondered, had he even been doing here so late at night? Had he lived above his shop? She could see that it was essentially intact, behind the now ruined barricade. She whirled around as she saw a bright flash, her wand in her hand and a curse on her lips, only to lower it as she saw it was merely a camera flash. Rita Skeeter and her photographer were somehow already here, taking pictures of the burnt-out buildings and bodies. She was sure a picture of her would be among Skeeter's selections, and suddenly she felt so very tired. "You did well tonight," Holly Dumbledore said as he approached her. "Did I? I didn't do anything to help you with Riddle, and Holly said, looking at Fortescue's corpse and going quiet. "Your protection of the others was of immense help, for it allowed me to focus solely on fighting Riddle. Without it, we would not have prevailed nearly so quickly, or with so few losses. Now, I think it would be best for both of us to return to bed." "You have given what aid you can here," Dumbledore said, and held out a hand to Holly. She took it and found herself standing outside the entrance to the Gryffindor common room. Holly stumbled up the stairs to her bed and collapsed into it without bothering to change out of her clothes or wash the ash from her hair. Chapter 83, Year 5, Chapter 10. Chapter Text. There was a loud clang, and Holly woke with a start. She rolled out of her bed and whipped her wand up. Her heart was beating rapidly, and she felt the ice-cold thrill run through her. Lavender Brown stared at her, crouching over her dropped goblet. "Holly?" Lavender asked, and Holly sighed. "Sorry, Lavender. You just startled me," that's all Holly said, the thrill fading from her veins as she realized where she was. It was a peaceful Saturday morning in the girls' dorms, and she was safe here. She put her wand down carefully and grabbed her own silver goblet. The ice-cold water in the jug that sat at the center of the circular room soothed her a little. Hermione was really worried about you, you know. And there have been rumors, Lavender said. Holly grimaced in response. I should probably go find her, then. Put in an appearance at breakfast too, Holly said. Holly, it's 11 in the morning. You might make lunch if you're quick in the shower, Lavender said. Holly blinked at that, before remembering how late she'd gotten to sleep. She managed to make it to lunch, through some clever hair-drying charms and dressing recklessly fast. Holly didn't even have to run down the stairs, and so she managed a relatively dignified entrance to the Great Hall. Everyone seemed to turn around in their seats to stare at her, and for a moment Holly was puzzled. Then she remembered Skeeter and her photographer had been at the alley last night. Holly walked silently to join her friends at the Gryffindor table, and it seemed like the clack of her shoes on the old stone of the floor was the only sound in the entire Great Hall. Hermione moved aside, opening a seat for Holly across from Ginny, and she took it. Conversation slowly resumed around the hall, but Holly didn't feel like talking to her friends in earshot of everyone else. Let's go outside, it's still nice out, Ginny said, and Holly smiled at her. She grabbed a sandwich from a platter, took a long drink of her goblet of pumpkin juice, and followed her friends out onto the grounds. Are you all right, Holly? Hermione asked. I'm fine. See, not a scratch on me, Holly said. That's not what she meant, mate, Ron said. I'm fine. It's not the first time, Holly said, as they sat down under a tree on a small hill overlooking the lake. It really was nice outside, a cool breeze blowing across the verdant grounds, the sun shining down with the gentle heat of early autumn, Holly thought. She felt her wand hand tremble a little, and she hated herself for it. Ginny placed her hand onto Holly's, covering it from view, and Holly was immensely grateful for it. The warmth of Ginny's hand touching her own seemed to bring her back, a little, and Holly realized how worried all of her friends were. People died, and I hate that they did, but I knew it was coming, and at least I could do something to help this time, Holly continued, looking out at the lake. She smiled a little as she saw one of the giant squid's tentacles break the surface. Okay, Hermione said, and she smiled sadly at Holly. Ron, we need to go to that Gryffindor prefect's meeting, Hermione continued. What? Oh, yeah, that meeting, Ron said, and Holly's sad smile grew a little wider. He got up and Hermione handed Holly her copy of today's Daily Prophet. The two of them walked back to the castle, leaving Holly and Ginny alone on the hill. They leaned closer to one another, the shade of the tree concealing them beneath it. Are you sure you're all right? Ginny asked her. I'm sure, Holly said, and she could almost believe it if her wand hand hadn't betrayed her again. If she could have met Ginny's eyes. Oh, Holly. You don't have to be so brave all the time, Ginny said. I know, Holly said, and she leant against her girlfriend. There, under the shadow of the tree and away from the rest of the school, Holly allowed herself to cry. Ginny was simply there, a comforting arm around Holly's shoulders and a shoulder to lean on. That, more than anything else, was what Holly needed. Thank you for, she said to Ginny, her voice hoarse and her face streaked with tears. Ginny leaned in and kissed her softly on the lips, just for a moment. Always, Ginny said, and then she leaned back and closed her eyes. It really was, Holly thought, a beautiful day. One of the last they would have, in the dying days of summer and the beginning of autumn, before rain and sleet and snow would cover the grounds. Before the mist would roll in off the highlands, and the ground would turn to mud. Holly let her girlfriend enjoy it, and turned her attention to the paper Hermione had left her. Diagon Alley attacked. In the early hours of this morning, the commercial center of the British wizarding world, Diagon Alley, was subjected to a ruthless assault by followers of Tom Riddle. This memory-made man led a legion of foreign subversives, many of them hardened by the recent instability in Greece and the Balkans, in the assault. 7 good, honest witches and wizards, including Florian Fortescue and Tom, barkeep of the Leaky Cauldron, were killed by these invaders looking to establish an island of purity. Further, 2 hit wizards assigned to guard the alley tragically lost their lives in the line of duty that night. The battle was vicious, and it is this reporter's eyewitness account that the Ministry's forces could not have held off the assault, which succeeded only in burning down the Leaky Cauldron, rather than destroying the alley as a whole, without 2 very different forms of aid. The first, and perhaps most inspiring, is that the ordinary witches and wizards living and working in the alley joined in the defense. Indeed, this reporter is proud to have aided the defense with a bit of quick wand work, but even the good people of Diagon Alley would not have been enough if it weren't for the timely arrival of other reinforcements long before the Ministries, Albus Dumbledore and Holly Potter. Headmaster Dumbledore duelled Riddle himself, and Miss Potter aided the defenders directly. The rumors that she has been trained by the Supreme Mugwump himself must surely be true, for no normal OWL student could have fought so fiercely, or so well. The photograph accompanying this article on the front pages of her, casting a curse so obscure not even our research department could find a note of it. Whatever it was, Miss Potter overwhelmed a dozen shield charms with one swing, taking several of the dark wizards down. Such powerful magic is frightening, of course, but I for one am glad that it is on our side. But why should a schoolgirl and a teacher be doing our fighting for us? How could the ministry be so ineffectual as to require that? As many of our readers know, this paper has not endorsed a candidate for tomorrow's ministerial election. That is, until today. Amelia Bones has proven to have opened this country up to attack from abroad, and only Rufus Scrimger can give magical Britain the security we so desperately need. The ministries of the continent, the Confederation in America or the exotic courts of the Orient, none will come to our aid in these dark times. Britain must stand alone, and Bones is dangerously deluded if she thinks otherwise. Rita Skeeter. Holly put the paper down with disgust. She remembered every face she'd seen on that barricade, and Rita's hadn't been amongst them. Though, as awful as the rest of the article was, she thought it had a point when it asked why she and Dumbledore had to do the ministry's job for them. She had a sinking feeling now, though, that Amelia Bones wasn't going to prevail in the election on Sunday. Riddle leading an attack on the alley with conspicuously foreign forces the day before the election seemed almost too perfect a setup for Scrimger, but Holly knew that not even the Order thought he was dark, just a xenophobic asshole. Could Riddle want him instead of Bones? All Holly knew was that politics was confusing, messy, and nothing she particularly wanted to be involved with. Somehow, though, she had the sinking suspicion that she would be whether she liked it or not. Holly and Ginny spent the rest of the afternoon flying around the grounds on their brooms, enjoying a sort of freewheeling aerial game of tag. Both of them now had almost instinctual flying skills from their animagus forms, and they could dip down low at great speeds. By dinner, they'd rejoined the rest of their friends and Holly truly was feeling a lot better. Not benign cooped up inside was doing wonders for her mood, in her opinion, and she had dearly missed flying on her broom this summer. She loved flying as a raven, but there was a part of her that loved the sheer speed of her firebolt most of all. The crushing acceleration, the sharp turns, it was a broom suited to almost any Quidditch position or playstyle, but it was first and foremost a seeker's broom. Her Nimbus 2000 had been a chaser's broom she'd made her own, but the firebolt was built for racetracks and diving after a snitch. It was also simply far beyond any other broom on the market when it came to performance, though Holly thought that the previous World Cup would probably be the only one to sport such a firebolt-heavy lineup. The enhancements and Rue New York behind the performance of the firebolt would either get out or be surpassed, and more general brooms in that bracket of performance would be released. Then another top-of-the-line racing broom would be made, and the cycle would begin again. Holly spent Sunday enjoying the first Quidditch practice of the year, trying to take her mind off what she was sure to happen that night. She wasn't particularly successful, and as she spent the evening studying for Transfiguration she kept one ear on the wizarding wireless in the corner of the common room. The smooth-voiced announcer kept giving updates about the election in between awful Celestina Warbeck songs. It was not going well. Bones seemed to have completely fallen behind Scrimger, and it was almost perfunctory when the announcer interrupted a cauldron full of hot, strong love to call the election. Rufus Scrimger was now the Minister for Magic, and Holly had an awful feeling that this suited Riddle, somehow. She had no idea what he stood to gain from it, or if instead, Voldemort might stand to lose something from it. "I think Scrimger's going to speak," Hermione said, and Holly began to pay attention to the wizarding wireless again. "Wizards and witches of this great country, it is my sincere pleasure to serve as Minister for Magic. I intend to move quickly to address the concerns and problems you have elected me to solve. No longer will these dark wizards be allowed to run rampant across our borders, no longer shall we shy away from doing whatever is necessary to achieve victory. And to those amongst us who choose to attempt an insurrection in the name of their hateful ideology, know that you will fail as you did 14 years ago. You will fail, and you will be remembered only as dead fools, Scrimger said, and Holly narrowed her eyes. She was all for strongly calling out the Death Eaters and the like, but something about the way he'd phrased whatever is necessary made her shiver. I will be introducing several bills to the Wizardgammo as of the first session tomorrow morning, including an expansion of the War Powers Act and a new bill ensuring the security of certain vulnerable locations, Scrimger continued, and Holly let the dryer stuff fade into the background. She could read the speech in the paper tomorrow morning, so long as Scrimger wasn't planning to announce a coup tonight, it would wait. Blimey, he's not Fudge, Ron said, to a general murmur of agreement. Holly said nothing and remembered the order meeting she'd sat in on. Something was wrong with Rufus Scrimger, and she wanted to know what it was. Chapter 84, Year 5, Chapter 11. Chapter Text. Holly walked into her first Defense Against the Dark Arts class for the year full of trepidation. Not because she thought it would be difficult, even with Snape teaching, she could have done the Newt exam for defense in her sleep at this point, but because Snape had been acting odder and odder towards her. She'd been happy, at first, when he'd gone from constantly berating her to ignoring her. After that order meeting, Snape was standing at the front of the classroom, barely lit by the thin strips of light coming in through the closed curtains and a few flickering candles. His sallow face, hook nose, and oily face seemed to take on an almost otherworldly quality in the shadows, and Holly thought he looked more like a vampire than a wizard. "There is no need for your book to be out yet, Miss Granger," Snape said, his usual acid coating his words. Hermione hastily put her book away, as did most of the class. "I shall expect you all to give me your full attention. Not to be distracted by your textbooks, or which weekly magazine," Miss Brown, Snape said, and Lavender Brown nearly jumped out of her seat in shock. "You have had 4 separate teachers in this subject so far, of varying quality. Quirrell was an incompetent fool, despite the Dark Lord attached to the back of his head. Lockhart was a dangerous fool, and Lupin was just dangerous. You have suffered from inconsistent instruction, and it is the headmaster's wish that you be brought up to standard. Now, more than ever is this class important. Not only is it your OWL year, and make no mistake, the vast majority of you are utterly unprepared for that level of magic, but it is increasingly likely that you will be put to a true test of what I will attempt to teach you outside these walls," Snape continued. Nobody spoke or moved an inch. The dark arts are an ever-changing beast, a hydra of ever-shifting heads. Indeed, even something as basic as what they are is a matter of dispute. "Can any of you furnish us with a definition of dark magic?" Snape asked. Hermione's hand shot up into the air, as did several other students. Snape grimaced a little and pointed to one of the other students. Dark magic is magic that causes harm to other people," Professor Parvati Patil said. "That is the definition in your textbooks, but not one I, or anyone else over the age of 10, uses. Miss Granger, perhaps you'd care to regale us with short summary of the arithmetic definition?" Snape asked, almost snarling the short. Hermione's eyes narrowed, but she launched into a rapid-fire explanation about prime numbers, calculus, and a half-dozen other concepts Holly suspected only she, Hermione, and Snape actually understood. As Miss Granger has so laboriously demonstrated, under the modern theory of magic, the definition of dark magic is enormously complicated. I wonder, however, if there are some amongst us who might be able to put it into simpler terms. Miss Potter, perhaps? Snape asked, and Holly heard all the other students seem to take in a breath at once and hold it. She felt all the ears in the room settle on her, and it was so quiet that even the sound of her breathing seemed deafening. Everyone had seen the wizarding photo of her casting an infamous dark curse on the front of yesterday's Daily Prophet. Dark magic is about intent. Not what you intended to do with the spell. A cutting charm isn't any different if you aim at someone's neck instead of firewood, but the emotions that power the spell. You have to mean it, Holly said, quietly. She remembered how she had thrown all of her anger, all of her hatred, at Barty Crouch Jr. and struck him dead with a killing curse. Snape, she knew, had heard of the event from Voldemort or his followers. She wasn't sure if he'd told Dumbledore. 5 points to Gryffindor, Miss Potter. The contrast in length shows how objective analysis of something so emotional and subjective remains a problem for magical theorists even to this day. Arithmancy, which can describe the impossible spaces magic creates with breathtaking simplicity and even beauty, requires complex and impenetrable mathematics to describe something that fits into 5 words. That is why what I teach in this class can only ever be a beginning, a foundation that must be built upon. A demonstration, I think, is in order. Mr. Thomas, to the front, Snape said, and Dean got up uncertainly. Snape had cleared a large area in the front of the class, and Holly could feel the subtle hum of dueling wards there. She cast her eyes around the dark classroom and saw a few runes lit by a soft orange glow, carved on river stones and placed in each corner. Attempt to defend yourself, Mr. Thomas. You may use any spell you desire, Snape said blandly, and then he jabbed his wand towards Dean. He barely managed to cast a verbal hex deflection, sending Snape's disarming charm back at him. Snape merely leaned his head to one side and let the spell pass him. He cast again, an nonverbal stunning charm this time, and the bolt of red light rushed towards Dean. Protego! Dean shouted, and he conjured a flickering barrier of energy, that shattered with a sound like breaking glass when Snape's stunner hit it. A few wisps of red light continued on, but though they hit Dean, he only looked briefly winded by them. Stupefy, he shouted, and again Snape didn't bother to shield himself. He simply stepped aside before Dean was even done casting. Expelliarmus! Dean shouted, and this time Snape did shield himself, and sent the blue bolt of light back at Dean. Dean dived to the floor, narrowly avoiding his own reflected charm, and shakily waved his wand towards Snape. Confringo, he shouted, and Snape waved aside his blasting hex with a single lazy movement from his wand. Expelliarmus, he said, and plucked Dean's wand from the air. An amateur effort, as to be expected from someone so lacking in consistent magical education. Miss Potter, if you would care to take your classmate's place. I understand your knowledge of counter curses is rather extensive, so let us both agree not to use any spells outside of the OWL curriculum, Snape said, and Holly got to her feet. Sure, she said, flicking her wand into her hand from up her sleeve. Snape's eyes narrowed at her informality, but he said nothing about it. Everyone leaned forwards a little, except for Seamus Finnegan, who was helping Dean back to his seat. She felt the sensation of magic against her skin as she crossed the dueling wards, and took her stance opposite Snape. Holly stood almost relaxed, her wand in a neutral position. She had one foot in front of the other, narrowing her horizontal profile without compromising her ability to dodge or weave. Snape just stood there, casually. She felt his mind brush at hers, but he withdrew after only a cursory inspection of her defenses. She didn't even bother trying to slip into his instincts. Anyone with good enough mastery over their own mind to act as a double agent between Voldemort and Dumbledore was far too good for her. Is that in the 5th year curriculum? Holly asked, raising one eyebrow. Is that in the 5th year curriculum, sir? And I believe you well know that it is not a spell, Miss Potter, Snape said. Please don't call me sir, Professor Holly said with an impish grin, and she flicked a stunning spell at Snape. He deflected it, and no more sharp words passed between them. They fought at 10 paces, too close to dodge a well-cast spell, and without words. There was only the silent fence of hex and shield, flashes of light and crashing explosions passing between them for a few moments. Then, as if by mutual consent, they paused for a moment. Holly had been unsure how good Snape was, and she was annoyed to find out that at this sort of fundamentals he was better than her. Not all that much better, but the edge existed. Without her usual recourse of powerful curses, distance, or unusual magic, she was at a serious disadvantage. Or was she wondered. Snape had said that they couldn't use any spells outside the OWL curriculum, he hadn't specified for which subject. Holly waved her wand and transformed an empty desk sitting against the wall into a swarm of wooden birds. Their beaks and talons gleamed with sharp bronze, the same bronze that had been used in the desk's fixtures. Snape's eyes went wide for the briefest moment, and Holly pressed her advantage. Transfiguring and animating so many of the birds at once, and without an incantation, was stretching the spell well beyond what would be expected of an OWL student, but the spell Holly had used was on the curriculum. She cast a barrage of hexes at Snape, who had to both block her spells and blast away the wooden birds, leaving him no time to attack her. Without having to worry about shielding herself, Holly was able to animate more objects and keep up a rain of blasting curses, stunning spells, and disarming charms on Snape. One got through, and she plucked his wand from the air with an exaggerated bow. 5 points to Gryffindor, Miss Potter. A demonstration of the benefits of competent tutoring. Can any of you explain why she was more successful than Mr. Thomas? Snape asked, and Holly frowned. That had been almost too easy. Snape had backed off the minute she'd tried something unconventional. Had he let her win to prove his point, or was something else going on? She used nonverbal spells, Sir Lavender Brown said. As did I, yet I did not prevail. What else? Snape asked. She used transfiguration and charms, not just spells we'd learnt in defense, Sir Seamus Finnegan said. A point to Gryffindor, Mr. Finnegan. There is one more difference, though I suspect Miss Potter was the only one to notice. If you would fill the class in. Snape said. I didn't let you read my mind, Sir Holly said, deliberately pausing before adding the honorific. Indeed. You are, after all, quite the accomplished Legilimens, are you not? You used it to great effect during the dueling tournament last year, Snape said, and while his voice carried no venom, Holly recognized the cruel cast of his features. A few people gasped. I did, in accordance with the Wizarding Dueling Code. I'd never use it for a frivolous and illegal purpose like finding out who'd taken my potion's ingredients, though, Holly said, grinning. If Snape wanted to keep this up, Holly had plenty of ammunition to make sure he went down with her. He held her gaze for a moment and looked away. Back to your seat, Miss Potter. Now, if Mr. Thomas is any indication, your shield charms are truly woeful. You will practice with one another, and when you demonstrate to my satisfaction that it can hold under 3 stunning cells, you may begin to work on your homework for this lesson. 2 rolls of parchment on the use of non-traditional spells in magical self-defense, Snape said, and Holly heard the class groan. Very few of them would be good enough at shield charms to pass that standard. That was wicked how you beat him, mate, Ron said. He went easy on me when I started animating stuff, Holly said, shaking her head. Blimey, if that's what you think easy is, reckon you could teach me that anti-mind reading stuff, then? Ron asked, and Hermione looked interested. Yeah, I suppose I could. Let me see your shield charms first, though, Holly said, and she was pleased to see that her friend's shield charms were more than good enough to pass straight away. Instead of going up with them herself, Holly went over to Neville, who she noticed was struggling. Doing okay, Neville? She asked. You know, Neville said, blushing and not looking Holly in the eye. There are a few helpful tricks for this, you know. Your wand movement's pretty good, but I think you're getting the end movements for a circular and dome shield mixed up, Holly began, working through Neville's shield charm with him. She spent most of the class helping out other students, only showing her own shield charm to Snape at the end of the lesson. She'd be a little behind on her homework, but it wasn't really that hard of an essay. Maybe you should be teaching the class instead of Snape, Holly Lavender Brown said as they walked away from the defense classroom. Please, don't put that curse on me, Lavender. But I'm happy to help, really. I find this stuff pretty fun, Holly said, and Hermione got an odd look on her face. Chapter 85, Year 5, Chapter 12. Chapter Text. Holly spent most of Transfiguration that afternoon brooding, not working on her vanishing spells. Though, as she was certain to remind Hermione about afterwards, Holly had already mastered vanishing spells. Like all magic, it seemed to be coming to her easier and easier these days. Holly supposed no longer having to deal with repressing her feelings about her gender would help, but it surely couldn't explain just how much she had improved. There was, she knew, another explanation for mastery. Dumbledore had told her Voldemort had given her much of his powers, and at the time she had thought that just meant Parseltongue and dark magic, but when she had first delved into darker magic during her second year, this had been what it felt like. Was all her magical talent, she wondered, just a reflection of Voldemort? Miss Potter. Perhaps you would care to demonstrate the vanishing charm on this conjured rabbit? Professor McGonagall asked, her tone firm, and Holly blinked. Pulling her attention back to the lesson, she drew her wand and waved it casually towards the rabbit. The magical construct was undone by the inverse of the free transfiguration spell, and the energy that had made it up was returned to the world it had been drawn from. People were staring at her, and it took Holly a moment to figure out that she'd done it without an incantation. She'd been so distracted with her thoughts that she'd forgotten to say one. Yes, well done Miss Potter. 5 points to Gryffindor for an nonverbal vanishing. Do remember, students, that you will be required to master nonverbal spells next year. McGonagall said as she conjured more rabbits for people to practice vanishing. Holly tried to get a head start on her homework as most of her classmates struggled to vanish the conjured rabbits, but she found herself drifting back into unhappy thoughts as she did so. Everything all right, mate? Ron asked as he looked at his half-vanished rabbit a little uncomfortably. I'll talk about it later, okay? Holly asked, and Ron nodded. Got any advice on how not to do that? Ron asked, gesturing towards the rather alarming half of a rabbit walking around on his desk. Sure. So what you need to focus on isn't getting rid of something, but returning it to, Holly began, and she felt better as she walked Ron through his first successful vanishing. Explaining it to him in a way that he could understand, saying it out loud, it helped to reinforce that she actually knew how to do it. Maybe, Holly thought, she had learned it from whatever powers Voldemort had left her that Halloween night, but she had still learned it. The skill was hers alone, even if she had a teacher. She wanted to believe that, at least. Miss Potter. The headmaster would like to see you after dinner, in his office, Professor McGonagall said to Holly as the lesson neared its end. Thank you for telling me, Professor Holly said as she finished the last bit of her essay. Wonder what that's about? Ron asked. Could be anything, Holly said with a shrug. Do you think he'll keep teaching you, even though he doesn't need to, prepare you for the tournament anymore? Hermione said, trying very hard to avoid making the implication that Dumbledore had flagrantly cheated to help Holly in the Triwizard Tournament. I hope so, his lessons were great, Holly said. They had saved her life more than once, at the graveyard, during the attack on Diagon Alley, and in more places besides. She shivered a little as she remembered the minutes-long spell she'd cast to call down a storm and animate the statues in the graveyard. It was by far the most powerful spell she'd ever cast, channeling the sheer magical power of a ley line through her own body for minutes at a time. So what were you looking so glum about in class, Holly? Not that you don't have more than enough reason to do that, Hermione asked as they walked back to the common room. Sometimes I wonder about how much of what I can do with magic is stuff Voldemort left me. Is anything I've achieved with magic actually something I did, or was I just leaning on the memories some ass left in my head as a baby? Holly replied. Never heard of you know who being any good on a broom, so I reckon being a bloody amazing seeker is all you, Ron said, and Holly couldn't help but smile. Of course, that was the first thing he'd bring up. At least I'll always have Quidditch, Holly said. Holly watched the high table that night with some curiosity, and she noticed that Dumbledore never arrived throughout the meal. He did take dinner in his office sometimes, she supposed. The roast lamb that night was particularly good, and morning Quidditch practice had left her rather hungry. She had a second helping, finished her goblet of pumpkin juice, and headed towards the grand staircase. Fizzing Whisby, Holly said to the stone gargoyle that guarded the entrance to the headmaster's office, and it slid aside. She walked up the rotating staircase and wondered if it predated the Muggle escalator or if Dumbledore had enchanted it after seeing one. The door to his office swung open as she neared, and Holly blinked. That was new. Ah, my dear girl. Do come in and take a seat, Dumbledore said, waving his wand and conjuring a comfortable plush armchair in front of his desk. It clashed horribly with the decor of the room, but by Merlin, Holly thought, it looked astoundingly comfortable. Thank you, Professor, Holly said, sitting down. She noticed the pensive on Dumbledore's desk then, and her eyes widened slightly. Have you found more memories? She asked. I have. My collection is almost complete, in fact, though I shall need your help to gather one in particular. I shall explain the situation in greater detail, but I think viewing the memory currently in my pensive will prove an excellent starting point, Dumbledore said, and Holly lowered her head into the glowing basin. The cool water touched her face for only a moment, and then she was somewhere else. Holly looked around eagerly, but she was surprised to find herself in one of the potions classrooms. It looked a little different, and the students wore uniforms that looked not quite right, but the class even had the same teacher. A much younger Horace Sloane approached a dark-haired young boy as potions class ended, and Holly felt her heart beat faster. Even from behind, she would recognize that boy, she would recognize Tom Riddle. She listened eagerly to their conversation, only to be confused by strange white fog and ethereal voices that sounded like a bad dub for a television edit of a movie. Sloane's lips moved, but the words that came out did not match what he was saying at all. She could even see places where the memory seemed to jump from one moment to another. "Sir, I wondered what you know about Horcruxes," Riddle asked, and Holly's attention snapped back to the conversation between Sloane and Riddle. She had never heard that word before, and she had read very, very widely on the dark arts. "I don't know anything about Horcruxes and I wouldn't tell you if I did. Now get out of here at once and don't let me catch you mentioning them again," Sloane replied, but it was obviously the voice of present-day Sloane, not his younger self. His lips didn't match it either, and white fog filled the room as the memory jumped from one moment to another, Riddle leaving. The memory ended, and Holly found herself back in the headmaster's office. "Professor, what was that?" "The white fog, and the sounds that didn't match the lip movements," Holly asked. "That memory, Holly, has been tampered with. Professor Sloane has been rather devious and altered the memory he provided to me," Dumbledore said, and Holly's eyes went wide. She hadn't known that was possible, although it probably explained why Pensieves weren't used for criminal trials. "Why would he do that? And what's a Horcrux?" "I've never heard of it," Holly asked. As to your first question, shame and fear, my dear. Horace is deeply ashamed of his real response to that question and deathly afraid that Voldemort will one day get around to killing him so that he cannot repeat it to me," Dumbledore said. Holly's eyes narrowed as she realized he hadn't answered her second question at all. "It can't have been that bad if you hired him again," Holly said. "Oh, on the contrary, it was perhaps the grandest lack of judgment I have ever seen by a professor at this school. Horace has, however, seen the consequences of his actions rather starkly. I would like you to retrieve the unaltered version of this one. Horace should invite you to his little slug club soon enough, he is rather taken with you," Dumbledore said. "I'll give it a shot, sir," Holly said. "Excellent. The matter is not particularly time-sensitive, we have rather a lot of memories to get through and other matters to solve," Dumbledore said, and there was a knock at the door. Holly turned around in her seat at the noise. "Do come in, Severus," Dumbledore said, and the door opened to reveal Snape standing in the doorway. His robes were billowing without any wind, as usual, and Holly really wanted to learn whatever charm did that. "Headmaster, Miss Potter," Snape said, and Holly blinked in surprise. That had actually sounded something like a halfway polite greeting. She half wondered if she should check for Polyjuice Potion. "Severus," Dumbledore said, inclining his head and conjuring another armchair. "This does bring us rather neatly to another matter I had been meaning to discuss with you, Holly. Rather a lot of parents have written very strident letters to me demanding I reinstate the dueling club in these uncertain times. I would ask Professor Flitwick to lead it, as he was a rather dashing competitor on the professional circuit in his day, but he is already committed to a great number of clubs and extracurricular activities. Luckily, there is another option. Professor Snape has kindly volunteered to take on the responsibility," Dumbledore said, his eyes twinkling. From Snape's expression, Holly was sure that he actually been volunteered for the post. "Yes. I was most excited to lead it. I do require an assistant, and none of the other professors has the free time to devote to it. There is, however, a second champion duelist available. One who has proved that her participation would be somewhat unfair to the other students," Snape said, his tone neutral. "No, absolutely not," Holly said. She would never act as Snape's assistant in a million years. "I understand that you and Severus do not get along well with one another, Holly. But I think he has proven himself able to at least act with courtesy around you, has he not?" Dumbledore asked. "I guess," Holly grumbled. "While you are not required to accept the position, I would consider doing so a personal favor. Professor Snape is bound to follow ministry guidance in his classes, in ways that he is not in an extracurricular activity. I believe that your presence as an instructor will attract more students to a club that may very well be of great aid to them, and to our cause as a whole," Dumbledore said. "Won't we just be standing on some platform and hexing each other from suicidally close distances, sir?" Holly asked. Dueling at 10 paces forces students to learn how to shield themselves. But I have a range of activities planned, Snape said, mildly. Holly felt curious, despite herself. I guess I can do it. Teach me something cool next time. Holly asked, eager for another lesson in obscure magic from Dumbledore. I will try, Dumbledore said, smiling a little. Our first planning meeting is on Saturday, 11 am sharp in my office. Don't be late, Miss Potter, Snape said, rising from his chair. Good evening to the both of you, he said, and departed. I would count the charm he uses to make his robes so bloody dramatic all the time as something cool, Professor Holly said, and she was sure Dumbledore held back a laugh. Chapter 86, Year 5, Chapter 13. Chapter text. Holly, Ron, and Ginny were walking back from Quidditch practice when they saw it. A large group of wizards and witches, most of them in the black uniform of Ministry Hit Wizards, walked towards the castle. Holly thought she saw a few Aurors mixed in with them, and saw a few of the Hit Wizards break off and head towards parts of the grounds. Many of them were casting spells to detect dark magic or reveal hidden creatures. What do you reckon they're doing? Ron asked. Trying to detect dark wizards, I think, Holly said, as she watched the Ministry Wizards moving across the grounds. With the barest push on her magic, she performed a partial animagus transformation. Her eyes became that of her raven form, although sized for her human head. She was able to see the Ministry Wizards much better through the long shadows cast by the setting sun. See anything interesting? Ginny asked. Not really, Holly said with a sigh, and let her transformation fade. Let's get back up to the castle, yeah. We're not really supposed to be out after dark, anyway, Ron said, though they all knew what he really meant was that Holly wasn't supposed to be out after dark. Holly gave the Hit Wizards no more thought that evening, instead preferring to concentrate on dinner and hanging out with her friends in the common room. She helped Lavender and Parvati with their charms essay and got some tips about the divination they'd be doing next week in return. The next morning was a Saturday, and Holly was glad of the break after her hectic first week back at Hogwarts. She had all of her homework done, and so could look forward to a weekend where her only obligation was to attend Angelina's slightly frantic Quidditch practices, and that was one Holly was happy to meet. Angelina might not be as much of a fanatic as Oliver would, but she was seriously aiming for a professional career. Most professional Quidditch players in Britain were former Hogwarts students. The other, smaller schools and homeschooled students were significantly underrepresented. As Holly was pondering that fact whilst she ate her poached eggs on toast, she saw Daphne Greengrass approach her. She surreptitiously flicked her wand out of her wrist holster and turned to face the Slytherin prefect, keeping her wand out of sight. "And what can I do for you this fine morning, Daphne?" she asked lightly, but Holly knew she'd let more of her suspicion leak into her tone than she'd really wanted to. "Professor Snape wants to speak to you in the defense classroom after breakfast." "Said it was about the dueling club," Greengrass said, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Thanks for telling me, Daphne. I'm gonna finish my breakfast first, though," Holly said. She gave Holly a weird look and walked back to the Slytherin table, while Holly's friends looked at her with concern. "Sounds kinda suspicious to me," mate Ron said. "It's fine, Dumbledore asked me to help him with it. He's not exactly friendly, but he's nothing like how he was when I'd just come out," Holly said. "Probably got a talking to about being nicer to you from Dumbledore or something." "Merlin, what I'd give to have listened in on that," Ginny said, cackling, and Holly laughed too. The owls carrying the Daily Prophet finally arrived then, and Holly thought they were surprisingly late. She, and the other students who got it, usually received their copy of the day's edition just as breakfast began. There was a stamp in red ink on the front page, and Holly raised an eyebrow as she realized what it said. It proclaimed that her paper had been inspected and certified to be free of any curses or other dark magic. "Your copy have one of these stamps?" Holly asked Hermione, who merely held it up for Holly to see and nodded. Holly turned her attention to the front page, where she found an explanation. "New security measures to safeguard our children. Minister for Magic Rufus Scrimgeour has today announced a series of new safety measures to be put in place at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. After a marathon Wizengamot session, which also passed several other security bills of less importance, the minister finally found the votes needed to bypass the procedural objections of the Wizengamot's chief warlock, Albus Dumbledore. The new measures include screening mail to and from the castle for dark magic, a permanent hit wizard and MLIP presence on the grounds, and various methods to root out any infiltrators amongst the student body. Minister Scrimgeour, in his address to the Wizengamot, highlighted the fact that several Hogwarts students have successfully performed extensive dark magic without being caught in the past few years alone, let alone the violence of the previous war. This reporter is glad that the future of Wizarding Britain is being safeguarded by the trained professionals of the ministry, not the efforts of amateurs like the school's headmaster, who also happens to be the chief warlock who tried to block the passage of the bill. One must wonder if such a concentration of power in one man's hands is wise, no matter his towering reputation. Certainly, his actions in relation to these new measures indicate that his loyalties may lie elsewhere than to his duties as chief warlock. One must also wonder about his connection to the ICW, especially in light of their persistent failures to stop foreign dark wizards and other subversives from attacking our nation. As brave as Dumbledore's defense of Diagon Alley was, one must wonder if the situation was not of his own making. Perhaps the time has come for him to be simply a school teacher, rather than a statesman. Rita Skeeter. I really dislike that woman, Hermione said, shaking her head in disgust. Me too, but it's not like there's much we can do about it, Holly said. Reckon that was what those guys we saw yesterday were up to? Ron asked, and Holly nodded. Probably. I do actually have to talk to Snape, though. As much as I'd rather not, Holly said, getting up as she did so. Better you than me, Ginny said, to a general chorus of agreement from her brothers. Hermione hid her laugh somewhat unsuccessfully behind her paper. Holly left the Great Hall, and as she neared the grand staircase, she saw several wizards in uniforms standing by it. 3 of them were in the dark blue uniforms of the Magical Law Enforcement Patrol, the regular police of Wizarding Britain, whilst one of them was in the black uniform of the Hit Wizards. Holly had seen several Aurors enter the castle, but the elite dark wizard catchers were probably too busy to be waiting around like this. A sign had been put up next to the entrance to the grand staircase, proclaiming that it was a wand scanning checkpoint. A little desk had been set up for the patrol wizards, whilst the Hit Witch stood by the staircase looking bored out of her mind. There was a little container of paper wristbands sitting on the desk. Excuse me, please, Miss Potter. Everyone needs to have their wand scanned once a day. New regulations, I'm afraid, one of the patrol wizards said as Holly walked towards the staircase. She felt a little bit of sympathy as she heard the apologetic tone in his voice. Sure, she said, flicking her wand from its holster and pointing it handle first towards the patrol wizard. Priory Incantato, he said, a little nervously. A hair-drying charm and a few vanishing spells emerged as little interpretive puffs of colored smoke. She was surprised that the man had got more than one spell out of the history charm, though she supposed it made sense that the ministry's ordinary police would be good at that particular charm. So what'll you do if students start casting a half-dozen random spells after they cast anything objectionable? Holly asked, casually. I'm sure we have a contingency, the man said, and Holly tried not to laugh as she flicked her wand back into her enchanted wrist holster. He took out one of the wristbands, which seemed to be made of white paper and had a ministry M and the word scanned in black ink written on it. She held out her left wrist and was surprised when it resized itself as she put it on. You get one of those a day. Now get going and stop pestering the poor man, Potter. I'm sure the minister will take your letter if you have any suggestions, the Hit Witch said. Holly smiled at her, as she often did to authority figures she found annoying, and walked up the staircase. She couldn't imagine the lines having to do that every day was going to cause. She could already see the line forming at the base of the stairs as she reached the 3rd floor and made her way towards the defense classroom. Maybe she should start getting to breakfast on her broom, Holly wondered idly. Ah, I see that Miss Greengrass found you after her, Miss Potter, Snape said as she walked into the defense classroom. There's a whole giant line at the stairs now, in case you haven't heard yet, Holly replied, as she took in the papers strewn about Snape's desk. Quite. Now, since the headmaster has had one of his customary brilliant ideas and asked us to teach this dueling club, shall we get to work? I imagine both of us have better things to do on a Saturday morning, Snape said, conjuring a chair for her with one lazy swipe of his wand. Sure. I'm not sure what sort of planning you need help with, though. Don't you already cover any spell they'd be allowed to use in defense, anyway? Holly asked. If I was merely planning on spending a year teaching over-eager students how to stand 10 paces from one another and blast each other to bits, you might have a point. The headmaster has a rather more practical curriculum in mind, however, Snape said, and Holly's eyes narrowed. Like what? She asked, and Snape handed her a number of scrolls. Each seemed to contain a lesson plan, only they looked nothing like any dueling club Holly had ever heard of. There was some instruction on the classical ultra-short-range fence, but she was surprised to see the duels rapidly grow in scale and practicality. By the third week, they were supposed to move from the traditional platform at 10 paces to large sections of the grounds with plenty of cover. After that, Holly saw plans for things like exercises intended to teach people to escape from an attack, as well as teaching groups of weaker wizards to defeat one stronger wizard. This looks more like the kind of defense curriculum you should be teaching than a dueling club, to be honest, Holly said, and she was surprised to see Snape smile. Exactly, Miss Potter. With Dumbledore's troubled position in the Wizengamot, he has little ability to have the regulations covering the teaching of defense against the dark arts changed. The content of a dueling club is, however, for the headmaster alone to decide, Snape said. How do I know I'm not gonna be spending my afternoons teaching some future Death Eater new tricks, anyway? Holly asked. How many of them do you think would willingly attend something taught by you, Miss Potter? That was why I was forced to take you on as my assistant, of course, as I shall explain to the Dark Lord. Even were I to teach suboptimally on his order, I cannot force you to do the same, Snape replied, his tone almost conversational. Holly's head felt like she'd been spun around a half-dozen times just following the web of plots Snape had just described. Can't the Ministry just pass law banning, I don't know, unauthorized clubs or something? Holly asked. They could, of course. But why would Rufus Scrimgeour want to? He might disagree with Dumbledore about the international situation, but the girl who lived teaching the students of Hogwarts to fight. Why, it might even play better in the papers than his new security measures, Snape said. Chapter 87, Year 5, Chapter 14. Chapter text. Holly was surprised to see how many people were willing to turn up on a Sunday morning for a dueling club led by Snape, of all people. Maybe the fact that her name had been attached to all the notices, at least the ones in the Gryffindor common room. It had only been a day since the announcement, and already there was what looked like 100 students milling about in Great Hall as the last dregs of breakfast were cleared away. As the house elves vanished the last bit of silverware from the kitchen below Holly's feet, Snape waved his wand within an angry swish and all the tables rose up into the air and began to stack themselves neatly at the sides of the hall. Holly sighed and waved her wand with a less angry motion, and all the long benches joined the tables. Snape strode forward to the headmaster's lectern, and everyone went silent. Now that you have all finished gorging yourselves stupid, we may begin. You will form 2 lines, 10 paces apart, with each student facing another in the opposite line, Snape said, and Holly tried not to roll her eyes. She knew he could be civil, their planning session yesterday had been bizarrely free of any anger or snarled insults. She had no idea why he was suddenly so over the top. All right, everyone. We're going to be learning basic shielding for the lesson part of today's meeting. Most of you should have covered hex deflection at least in class, yeah? Holly asked, amplifying her voice with magic a little. Most of the students nodded, though a few of the younger students, second years, mostly, as the club wasn't open to first years, looked confused. The incantation is cheer and the wand movement is like this. Give it a try now, Holly said, and she walked down the double line of students. After about 5 minutes, all of the second years could at least make a very weak shield. Hex deflection didn't use true shield charms, and cheer was a spell made for the much weaker wands used by the Romans. It was quick to cast and easy to learn, at least for someone with a modern wand, and had been further refined by modern arithmancers. This dueling club will not be the farce of Lockhart's that some of you may remember, but neither will we stick strictly to traditional wizarding honor duels, either. We will be starting at 10 paces, however, because my most common observation of my defense classes so far is that while many of you may cast a mean jinx, far fewer of you can shield yourselves at all adequately. I hesitate to assume all of you managed to learn the marking jinx in your first year. Snape asked, to a chorus of awkward noises of confirmation. The marking jinx was a very simple spell that sent out a harmless bolt of colored light that stung slightly and left a glowing mark on clothes for an hour or so. How surprising. The line to the left will begin by casting the marking jinx at the person opposite them. Then, after 30 seconds, you will cease and move one position down. The students who were casting the marking jinx will then defend themselves, and so on. You will use hex deflection and shield charms only, no counter jinxes or poorly thought out attempts at dodging. Any students whose clothing remains unmarked at the end of the exercise will receive 5 house points. Snape said, and set some kind of mechanical sand timer down on the high table. There was a loud gong, and everyone started casting wildly. Quite a few students ended up covered in green or red or purple marks even before the first 30 seconds were over. Holly was proud to see Ron, Hermione, and Ginny all utterly unscathed. All 3 of them had managed to get a shield charm up before the first jinx had been cast at them and simply held it for 30 seconds. Most of the other students in the hall, even the upper years, weren't fast enough to cast a full shield charm to stop a jinx at this distance, and many of them ended up relying on wild hex deflections. Holly walked up and down the lines of students, giving advice and encouragement. Snape simply stood, straight-backed with his cloak billowing despite the lack of wind, in front of the high table. She was surprised that he wasn't snapping insults and mean-spirited advice at everyone other than the Slytherins, but she'd take it. There didn't seem to be that many of the Slytherins here, anyway, certainly none of the ones who talked excitedly in dark corners about how the Dark Lord was back. Apparently even Snape couldn't counterbalance Holly teaching, for them. The exercise went on for perhaps half an hour, with a 5-minute break in the middle. Most of the students were covered head to toe in glowing marking, but quite a few seemed to have either been good enough or learned quickly. Hermione and Ron only a few marks on them, where they'd failed to get their shields up fast enough, and Holly grinned as she saw that Ginny was completely unmarked. She wasn't the only one, but it was a rare distinction. Aside from Ginny, only 2 other students were unmarked. One of them was Susan Bones from Hufflepuff, who had clearly had some kind of formal training worth a damn, and the other was Jack Clark. He was a pureblood 6th year from Slytherin, though not one known to be a bully to particularly bigoted towards Muggleborns. 5 points to Slytherin, Hufflepuff, and Gryffindor, Snape said, sounding rather annoyed at the last line. This brings us to the dueling portion of today's meeting, which I am sure all of you are very eager to get to. You will move one position down and duel the student opposite you, casting only hexes and charms to incapacitate, and shield charms. Anyone who takes so much as a single step will forfeit the duel. Begin. Snape said, and this time instead of harmless bolts of multicolored light, stunning spells and disarming charms flew across the 2 lines of students. Most of the duels were over in the first exchange, but not nearly as many as would have been at the start of the meeting. The longest duel lasted perhaps 30 seconds, between Fred Weasley and Tracy Davis. Holly had to walk down the line of students reviving people who'd been stunned, and then Snape had people move a space down and duel once more. After another 2 rounds of that, he called a halt. And the 3 unmarked students emerged victorious in all of the duels. Shielding is not the answer to everything, but you will not last long in a real duel if you do not master it. Almost nobody is fast enough to dodge a curse from 10 paces, and nobody's fast enough to dodge 2 in rapid succession. Weasley, Bones, Clark, stay. The rest of you, to the side. Our 3 victors will duel Miss Potter, who will restrict herself to spells within the OWL Siriculum. The 3 of you are free to cast whatever spells might appeal to you, Snape said, and Holly sighed. It was probably necessary, and Ginny wouldn't be mad, but still. She faced off the 3 students. Susan Bones looked excited, Jack Clark looked rather nervous, and Ginny gave Holly an understanding look. The other students had gone off to the side of the hall, and Holly heard their excited whispers. Well, she thought, I may as well give them a show. Begin. Snape said, and Holly moved with almost inhuman speed. Her first silent disarming charm was in the air before any of her 3 opponents had drawn their wand. Jack Clark was blasted backwards by the bolt of blue light, and his wand sailed into the air, but Holly had already sent a second spell flying towards Susan Bones before her disarming charm impacted Clark. Susan shielded, barely, but her shield charm rang like a church bell as Holly's stunning spell, a wrist-thick bar of crimson light, slammed into it. That was enough for Holly, and she managed to deflect Ginny's disarming charm. She didn't have the time to use standard shield charms, not if she wasn't allowed to move, and so she cast a silent hex deflection angled just right. The disarming charm smashed into Susan's wavering shield charm, and it shattered with the sound of breaking glass. Holly snapped her fingers and bound Susan up in conjured ropes, then shielded herself against Ginny's blasting hex. "Damn," Ginny said, and then with the other two down it was all over. Holly's girlfriend put on an impressive effort, managing to last 3 more exchanges before Holly disarmed her. She handed Ginny and Clark back their wands, then cancelled the hex on Susan with another click of her fingers. "That wasn't on any OWL curriculum I've ever seen," Potter Clark said. "I think you'll find the Incarious hex is on the defense exam every year. Doing it without a wand is basically a part trick, but I can teach you if you like," Holly said, and he laughed. "I guess it is," he said, shaking his head. "You did well, Ginny," Holly said, smiling at her girlfriend. "Well, I lasted the longest, anyway," Ginny said. "And here is a demonstration of why speed matters." Miss Potter was able to defeat 2 of her opponents within the opening moments of the duel, allowing her to finish Miss Weasley off without interference. "The time for next week's meeting will be on your house notice boards, as soon as I have estimated the average idiocy of this week's defense homework," Snape said, and people began to filter out of the hall. "You know, for something run by Snape, it was actually pretty fun," Ron said as he, Holly, Ginny, and Hermione left the Great Hall. "He must have been awful to work with, though," Ginny said, and Holly frowned. "He was fine, actually. Did it seem like he was going kind of over the top to anyone else, at least as far as he could without doing his usual thing of picking a Gryffindor and insulting them?" Holly asked. "You sure he hasn't confused you, mate?" Ron asked, and Holly rolled her eyes. "Something's up with him. I still don't know why he was acting so weird at that order meeting, or why he's suddenly able to talk to me after years of just ignoring me," Holly said. Ginny was about to respond, but she stopped as they all saw Professor Sloane round the corner. Holly had enjoyed his first lesson, and learned more from it, than she had any of Snape's. "Ah, Holly my dear. And your friends, well, that's rather convenient. I've sent out letters, but since I've run into you, would the 4 of you do me the pleasure of joining me and you other students for lunch at, say, noon in my office?" Sloane asked, and Holly blinked. "Ah, sure. Sounds good," Holly said, thinking back to her meeting with Dumbledore. "Well, I didn't have any other plans. What about you, Hermione, Ginny?" Ron asked. They responded affirmatively, and Sloane beamed. "Excellent, excellent. I must admit that all of you have been quite fondly recommended to me, and so far that has been more than justified," Sloane said, before continuing down the stairs. "Do any of you know what we just agreed to?" Ginny asked. "I think Sloane was supposed to have a club of all the students he thought would be worth knowing after Hogwarts or something," Holly said. "I can see how Hermione got in, being a genius and all, but I reckon me and Ron are in under the girlfriend and best friend of the girl who lived clause," Ginny said, shaking her head. Ron looked faintly embarrassed. "I reckon he just didn't want to seem rude not inviting us," Ron said, and Holly felt guilty at the note of jealousy in his voice. "Come on, you two. You're both more than good enough to get into his dumb club on your own. Didn't you just ace that dueling club meeting, Ginny? And you had a great season as keeper last year," Holly said, and tried to believe it. "Sure, Holly. The fact that you and I are constantly snogging has nothing to do with my invite," Ginny said. "I mean, I think you're pretty good at it," Holly said, and immediately felt her face go red. Chapter 88, Year 5, Chapter 15. Chapter Text. Professor Sloane's office was much nicer than Snape's had been as potions master. It was situated on the ground floor, facing the lake, and had a moving spiral staircase that led down to the potions labs. It had clearly once been a classroom, but it had been decorated with fine furniture and drapery, and whilst Holly didn't know much about the various objects and paintings that lined the walls, they all looked very expensive. She and her friends had arrived at the office just before dinner like Sloane's letter had told them to. There was a long table of fine dark wood, set with extravagant golden cutlery, and candles floated above it. A number of other Hogwarts students were there. Holly recognized Neville and smiled at him, but she thought he looked very uncomfortable and like he'd rather be down in the Great Hall. That was where the pleasant surprises in terms of the Slug Club's membership stopped. Cormac McLagan was there, an arrogant sixth year who Holly had hexed after his particularly insulting attempt to ask her to the Yule Ball, as well as a number of Slytherins. Blaise Zabinai, a handsome fifth-year Slytherin boy, and Daphne Greengrass were the ones Holly recognized. "Ah, my dear girl. I'm glad I caught you. I rather wanted to have this meeting on the train, but the new security arrangements, well, do take a seat. I trust you all know Miss Potter and her friends." Sloane said from his seat at the head of the table, and with a gesture, a number of seats near him pulled themselves out for Holly and her friends. There was a general chorus of polite laughter from most of the students, and Holly thought that attending the Slug Club might be worth it if she got to see Daphne Greengrass try very hard to pretend to like her. "Now that we're all here, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to attend this little get-together. I take particular pleasure in mentoring those students of mine likely to go far, and I'm sure I'll be impressing students with tales of what you were all like in school before long. The minister owes me a few favors.